Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of Art 1.2. And tonight is when you'll get all the information you'll need on how to write your papers and a sample paper. I'll actually show you literally an image on the computer screen so you can just see what a paper looks like. But if I sent you all by now, hopefully all of you printed out 2 more handouts. Let me let in a couple more people here. Just a second. Anyway, the handouts you should have with you now before we go through procedure on the papers are the 5 requirements for your short papers. Okay, plus the other one is the sample paper, which gives you an image, like I was saying a moment ago, that you hopefully by now have read, if not printed out. You don't need to print it out. 6 pages, including the bibliography and the drawing and the cover sheet. So we'll go over all of that, step by step, and get to all your questions, any questions you have at all about the papers and how to write them. What are the requirements, of course, are what we're going to cover in the first half of class. Now we're probably going to end a little earlier than usual tonight, and the reason for that is that we have less slides tonight than we will almost every other night afterwards. However, if you guys, should all, of course, everyone should have their syllabus next to their computer screen. If you glance at next week, it's an extra long list. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll still end early, even by doing this, and cover at least 1, if not 2 or 3 of next week's slides. So we don't have such a unusually long list to cover in one night. So we don't necessarily have to run right up to the 9:30 hour next week. Okay, I don't think anybody should object to that because you can see this week's list is only 6 slides, and we can certainly cover at least 9 easily each night. Okay, and then of course still end early. All right, any questions? I thought I heard someone. Yeah, I'm just keeping my eye down below. A couple people told me they have to get back from work, and they don't. At least 2 students in tonight's class uh, said they can't log in until around 7:15. So I'll just every couple of times at most, I hope, before the last person checks in, I may stop or pause just to check anyone else who's in the waiting room. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to go to speaker view. And then if you don't have your handouts in front of you, that shouldn't be a problem because we're going to cover everything step by step anyway. And if it's always the case, I've said this since the first week of class, anything you somehow didn't get, if you joined the class late or something's happening with, which it does with the, you know, uh, email system at this college. It's happened before where 1 or 2 students in any given week don't get the assignments that everybody else does from me sent to you by PDF as PDF. I mean, by, of course, email through the JC portal. If that happened, just email me right away. And then, at the break or at the end of class or by the next day anyway, and you'll get it within 24 hours. I will send them individually to you, and that always has worked before. Okay, so if you have, as you should now, the handouts and for, oh, what, one more thing. I didn't realize it, but we actually have until the end of this week to submit drops. It's called a census roster. All of us are required, as some of your other teachers have probably mentioned, by, I think it's Thursday or anyway, within 3 days after we got the notice, which was Monday. So that is Thursday, to submit any names of students who just haven't shown up and that therefore should be dropped. And it's a short list, but let me call those names out of people I didn't get a mini bio from yet. I just sent another reminder as the final reminder. Most of you have done this already. And so if you don't hear your name, you're good. Okay. So we'll leave it that way. So I got your mini bios. Okay, so there's only a handful of people who are still on my roster who, if I don't get a mini bio from them, by Thursday, I'll have to just go assume they're dropping and submit their names on the census as drops. Okay, by the end of the day, Thursday. So Lin Ying Cheng, okay, looks like Lady Requena, Oscar Rios, Constance Tanner. I think that's it. Let me just double check. So that's actually pretty good. That's over 90 some percent of the people who signed up are still, at least officially, hopefully, and physically with all of us as we proceed. Or if you missed the lecture, everyone knows you can go see it on YouTube by 7 p.m. on Friday of the week that lecture was given. Okay, catching my breath. Here we go. A couple more people want to be admitted. All right. Okay, we were just, for those who just joined us, we're just about to start going over how to write your papers. So you should have next to your computer screen the handout that is labeled 5 requirements for your short paper. And we're going to go over those one by one, and any questions you have, now is a good time to ask. If I were you, just a heads up or suggestion, for those who want to use an efficient method of making sure you don't miss any requirements so you have a really good shot at an A, I would take a look at this paper as you're working on yours, at this handout of the 5 requirements, just to double check. And then before you submit it to me, see, did you miss any of these or not do them properly? Okay, we'll start with the fact that the first thing, number 1, okay, you should all see in order. We're going to go 1 through 5 here. Number 1, you must have at least 1 full page. And that means, I'll explain what that means in just a minute. 1 full page on both the meaning and the formal analysis. Please keep these 2 sections separate and label them. That's really important, because a lot of times when either I or my readers are reading through a paper where they don't do that, we can't tell where your formal analysis starts and your meaning ends, and you might not get full credit for one or both sections. It's very important to keep them separate, as we do with the notes I give you in class, and label them. Okay, but what number 2 is, obviously these 2 are related to each other. Number 2 is, what do we mean by a full page in this class, in most college classes, in fact? Okay, so when we say that papers must be a minimum of 2 full pages, that's very short, and very few people get an A on that. 3 pages is often enough to get an A, though. When we say short, we mean 2 to 5 pages. Anything less than 2, you're not going to get an A. It's not possible to cover everything properly, as you'll see when we go through the rest of the list. But you don't have to, please don't give me 7 or 8 or 10 pages. That's too long. That's overkill. I mean, if you get really involved in the subject you're writing about, I'm not going to grade you points off because you gave me an extra long paper, but try to be kind to me and the readers. So 7 pages is overkill. So really, most A papers are 3 to 5 pages, in that range somewhere. Okay, so what do we mean by a full page? Here we go, number 2. That means a double-spaced 12-point typeface. By the way, Times New Roman is the preferred typeface in most college classes, so I prefer it. It's easier to read, much easier on eyes of people my age, and also so my readers, many of them. And just in general, it's what's most legible. So I didn't say it had to be Times New Roman, but don't give me Gothic or something it's hard to read, please. Double space, that's really important, so that we can, write comments or make notes about what you're missing or what you're doing well. As me, I'm talking about in the readers, or go through each page. So here we go again. What does it mean to 2 full pages? It means at least 23 double-spaced lines, 12-point typeface. Anything less than that on either section will result in points off. I'll give you a good example. It's quite common for the first paper to see people drop 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down to start their first line on page 1. Maybe they'll start with the meaning. Let's say you can do either. You can do the formal analysis first and then the meaning, either way. The point is that, let's say your first section is just to the bottom of that page, but you started 4 lines down. Well, I'm not going to be fooled by that. Neither are any of the readers. So we do a line count, not a word count, a line count. And if it's 20% less total lines, then it should be. It's easy. You got a calculator. It's mathematics. There's no, arguing or debating with what something is or isn't. If it meets the 23 line minimum, you're good. If it's anything under that, we figure out how much under and accordingly deduct a few points. And why do that? The first time you write your papers, it's easy to keep. So if you start your papers below, most people have to, because you're going to put your name and, of course, the class, hopefully all of that at the top of the first page, and the title and the artist name. Then you're going to go well into the second page before you're done meeting this requirement for the first half, whether that's the meaning, it doesn't matter, or formal analysis. Then the same thing applies. Again, pretty straightforward. 23 lines, double spaced, 12-point typeface for the other half, whichever that is, formal analysis. So you're going to end up, that's why you're going to end up with at least 3 type pages if you want full credit and no points off for being too short on either half. I think that's pretty straightforward, pretty self-explanatory, but any questions before we proceed to the next item of requirement? Anybody have any questions about length requirements? Now you see, my wife got me this cup. It's a Van Gogh painting I've never saw before, and it's an impressionist painting, and we're going to cover him in great detail. I already mentioned that to you guys the first week of class. He wasn't an impressionist, but he did dabble in it as a student or beginning painter, and this is one of the few examples where that's clearly a seascape. I thought it was one of the other impressionists. I didn't recognize it as Van Gogh, but it says so on the bottom of the cup, and it's from the museum in Amsterdam called the Van Gogh Museum. Everyone who loves Van Gogh should go there at least once in their life. It'll bring tears to your eyes if you have any passion for or empathy for what he went through in his life. I mean, to create the art he created. Okay. All right. No questions. Anybody else now on 1 or 2? Let's see. Is there anybody else who wants? Yeah, there's somebody else who wants in the waiting room. Okay. I thought they were already in. Is there still? Let's see. Hopefully that's everybody. Okay. Admit. Sorry. There we go. All right. Thank you. Number 3, illustrations. This also, I think, is pretty straightforward and easy to meet this requirement. They must be at least half a page. Well, that would be if it was printed, of course. But what I'm trying to avoid, even though you're doing your imagery and everything else digitally for these classes this semester, it would be the equivalent of a full half page printed out. And the point is to avoid these little thumbnail things, where all you have is like a large postage stamp size thing from a website where there's a little image of a work of art you're writing about in the upper right corner, upper left corner, whatever. That isn't going to work for me to be able to see if you covered all the elements in your formal analysis. We have to see clearly, me and the readers, a clear, and it does say here, number 3, clear means if it's a muddy print or a muddy image, too pixelated or whatever, too dark, that's points off. I mean, you'd get some credit for submitting an illustration, but try to make sure they're sharp, clear, and the equivalent of what would be a half page or larger, and that the colors are accurate. Now, if the original work of art is not in color, that certainly can be a very common occurrence, right? With prints, engravings from the Renaissance. We're going to cover some in this class, or like M.C. Escher, who did, as some of you know, some of the most bizarre, complex, mind-boggling engravings of the 20th century. Then you probably would you would not be able to produce a color image because the original work wasn't. So you just have to say that. That's all. You just have to be specific when and if you're writing about a work of art that is itself only black and white and has no warm and cool colors. Then you would say that in your formal analysis. And maybe just to be safe, you could put it below the illustration too. But most of these works I'll be able to tell by looking if they were, but you do need to say it, because I can't always tell that the original wasn't in color or was just black and white. Okay, so again, number 3, I think it's pretty straightforward. Any questions about that? Oh, here we go. Daisy, welcome, I guess. All right, any questions about yeah. No? Okay, fine.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can it also be a photo?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. You could do I guess you could do a screenshot, I suppose, if it's a good, sharp, clear screenshot of a photo, or I know you could take the photo yourself, but then I don't know. I wouldn't know how to do this, how to convert that into a digital image you can attach to a PDF file. But yes, whatever the image is, as long as it's sharp and clear and the equivalent of a half page or larger, then that's fine. However you manage to get the image. Yes, that's okay. All right. So moving on to number 4. 4 and 5 are the ones that people miss the most often on their first paper, and it's easy to avoid getting points off if you just carefully follow these 2. 4 and 5, these requirements. So let's do the first one. Number 4 is about your bibliography. I understand why people get confused. Bibliography and works cited. I'm not going to take points off if you label your bibliography technically incorrectly, because that's not works cited. Works cited are citations within the text of your paper, in the body of your paper, which came from a bibliography. So bibliography is a separate list. It should be labeled bibliography, right? And on the last page, that is way we can go back and forth and see, did you, use that bibliography in your paper? I'll get to how you do that in number 5. But just on the bibliography itself, here are the requirements, okay? You must use at least 3 new sources, and at least one of those new sources must be printed. Well, now that's a hard thing to enforce with the virtual reality method of distance learning Zoom classes that we're all doing. So I would just say, if you can find of course, what else could you do? Most of you, a digital version of something like, let's take Encyclopedia Britannica. I think it's the only company still making encyclopedias in the world regularly, printing them. So you're not going to have to go out and look for one of those in print form, but there originally were a print edition. And then this is you'll find online a digital version of the original print item, whatever it was. Now that's true for museum brochures, from art museums, that you might be using an image from that to write about. So in your bibliography, if it came one of your 3 new sources from an originally printed source, like a magazine that then has a course, or a book that's an ebook, which was originally printed, as all the books I've written on architecture now are also ebooks, both. That's easy to just say that. Please stipulate that in your bibliography, and that will cover this requirement, because no one now is expected to go to a library or a bookstore and hand, print, whatever, borrow or buy one of those printed texts and then, refer to that only in a bibliography. So you can I'll be flexible, but try to find sources that were originally printed, at least one. Now, 3 new sources, that doesn't preclude you or prevent you from using either Stockstead or Gill or both. So this should be obvious, but I'll make sure it's clear as we move through this requirement. If you did want to use Stockstead and Gill, because there are things in them that refer to your, parts of the meaning or the formal analysis in your papers, and you meet this requirement, you're going to have how many sources? 5, right? Because you're going to have 3 new ones if you follow that requirement, plus the 2 existing ones. I've seen people just blow past this requirement, give me Stockstead, Gill, and 1, originally printed source, and think they've met the requirement. There goes, you lost a grade right there, because it is important to use the research sources properly, and that's why we call this a short research paper. It's easy to meet the requirement, though, because there's so much, and you can use Wikipedia, by the way. I don't know if any of you have, well, some of you actually are high school advanced placement students, as I recall, in your mini bios. My daughter in her senior year, almost all her teachers said she can't use Wikipedia. Why not? I mean, it didn't used to be a good source. 10 years ago, it wasn't very reliable, but they got sued. Really big time. They lost $10 million. The founder he was interviewed on the 10th anniversary of the founding of Wikipedia, which is about 5 years ago. What is it now? 15-year-old website. And he said, I learned my lesson. I used to let people post anything they want with no fact checking and no verification or other sources to back it up. And now you know this, you've used it, all of you use Wikipedia. You can use Wikipedia as one of your sources in this class, one of your new sources. But try not to make it for all of your 3 sources. That's less likely to give you a good source of information. Less likely, I meant to say than say varying your choices. We'll get to some of the other options besides websites in a minute, but before we finish up that point, Wikipedia now has, as you all know, verified references at the bottom of every article. They don't print or publish them. They don't post them if they're not. So it's as reliable as almost any other information website. You can use Wikipedia if you want, but don't only use it as your only internet source. Okay, what other kind of sources can you use? Well, anybody think of anything other than an online version of a book or magazine or a website that might relate to a work of art you're writing about? Anybody think of any other sources? or have questions about what other sources are acceptable, there's more than a couple. No, nobody. Okay.
Is it possible to go through like a museum's website, or
Oh
are
yeah.
the
Oh,
museum's online
absolutely.
catalog?
Absolutely. It's a good source. Any museum that puts up an exhibit about any artist is going to have done their homework unless the curator wants to get fired. I, I will tell you, there are times. This is a quick aside. Julia Morgan. Okay, we are going to cover her, and you know that after this, the midterm, then we're going to have a few very short readings, short chapters from the book I wrote about her. The point is, she's the first woman architect in American history to have her own office. Or an amazing person. She was not included in an exhibit of arts and crafts. That was her mainstay, her forte, her preferred stylistic mode. And when the curator was asked why, he said she was on the fringes of that movement. No, she wasn't. She was one of the founders of that movement. She and Bernard Maybeck, her mentor, and she did over 300 buildings in that style. It's like the guy didn't know what he's talking about, but rarely is that the case. So yes, go ahead. In other words, in museum brochure or websites are good sources. Anybody think of any others types of sources? Well, how about the artists themselves? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Everybody see that? Anybody have? I've heard that students have used it, but I don't have anyone personally have told me in my classes this semester, at least, that they went there. But yeah, you know that the library has, yeah, right, a help desk, a media center they used to call it. Well, not media center. Yeah, reference or help desk. There we go. They will help you find, A, appropriate sources, and B, tell you how to list them, because you do need to use MLA format if you want full credit. It'd be a minor deduction of points if you didn't do it just right. But if you don't know how to do that, I actually wrote this down and I'll spell it for you. Noodle, like the word, noodles that you eat, right? Udon or whatever type. There it is right at the end of this there. Noodlebib.com is only one of, I don't know how many, a dozen perhaps, or at least half a dozen different reference sources to use to see how do I list in my bibliography correctly a book, a magazine, a website. It's pretty straightforward. Most of you should have done it by now, certainly by the time you got out of high school. But if you haven't, or you're not sure, or you're using an unusual type of source, which we haven't finished what those could be, just for your own ease of mind or peace of mind and simplicity's sake, you can get in touch with the library. Obviously, you don't have to go in person anymore. You used to have to walk into the library on the main campus or the Petaluma campus, and someone was there at least every hour the library was open to tell you in person, okay, you're going to do this. You want to cite this type of source, brochure, or how about documentaries? No one's mentioned that. Documentaries are fine as long as they're from reputable sources, not QAnon. Sorry. But, in other words, like a History Channel or PBS or the museums themselves put together documentaries. At least the big ones do. I don't think any in San Francisco have done that. But the New York Metropolitan Museum does documentaries. Chicago Art Institute does. The Louvre does. So if your work is in one of those museums, they might have a documentary. Then how do you cite that? Check with either do that Noodlebib. I'll spell it for you again slowly. Noodle, this is one word, NOODLEBIB.com. But it's even faster and easier just to go through your own JC, the SRJC library website, and check reference and then MLA citations or citing sources in a bibliography. And you'll see examples in every field or every type, of sort. Well, what are the sources I was about to say a moment ago? Could you come up with? Let's see. How about the artists themselves? There are a lot of artists living in the greater Bay Area who are alive and well. I've had them come as guest speakers to my classes. Anybody ever hear of the movie Big Eyes with Amy Adams? Great movie about a woman who had her credit stolen by her no-count thieving husband. But unfortunately for her, she didn't think to argue with him until finally she realized how much money he was making off her artwork. He put his name on her paintings. She's the one that created the children with the big eyes, that look like they're staring hypnotically at you. She became world famous because of that. The movie about it is a true story. It's called Big Eyes. Now that's something you could watch for extra credit, right? And it's all set in the Bay Area within the last 30 years. That woman, her name is Margaret Keane. Great, successful local. She lives in Petaluma. Well, maybe she's moved. She was living in Petaluma when I first started teaching here, and she came as a guest speaker. So students wrote, some of them chose to write papers about one of her works of art, and they could interview her easily because she gave out her, I think it wasn't her phone number. It was probably her not voicemail, her email. But every artist that's successful that I've ever heard of, living artist anyway, has a website. So you could interview the artist. They might let you do it over the phone. Then it's a phone interview, a live phone interview. And there's a way to cite that. I'm not going to go into that because that's, as you know now, you have ways to look up. So you could do interviews with the artist website, a museum website, a brochure from a museum, a documentary. That pretty much covers most of the types of sources, in addition to print, former or originally print source or websites. Okay, so anybody have any questions about number 4 before we move on to the last one? All right, number 5 is where more people than any of the other 4 or any of these 5 requirements tend to, miss out somehow and get a few points off that could have given them a higher grade. Here's the requirement for this. A citation, citing your sources is what this is. So that's why you shouldn't, it confuses things to label your bibliography that way. Bibliography is just that, one word. Bibliography, we just covered, it's a list of the sources listed correctly in MLA format. So what is number 5 about? It's about how you reference which sources out of that bibliography you used in the body of your paper. We're giving you a break. This is actually my requirement. This was Sarah Gill, who wrote one of the 2 texts that you guys have, of course. My mentor and a good friend, retired many years ago, living in Berkeley. She came up with this as a reasonable minimum for a research paper of such short length. You must cite at least 2 of the sources from your bibliography within the text of your paper. Pretty reasonable. You have at least 3, so you don't have to cite them all, but at least 2 of them, 2 different ones or more if you can. Either with standard footnotes, and I know you've all done footnotes, so you couldn't have gotten through high school without doing this, but that's a cumbersome, more complicated or complex way of citing sources. So if you don't want to do footnotes at the bottom of each page, you can do notations at the end of the sentence or paragraph in which you used that source. So what does that mean? If you have a quote that isn't common knowledge, like the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, so Roosevelt said that during the Depression, or the only ask not what your country can do for you. Okay, Kennedy's inauguration. That kind of famous thing you don't need to cite because people have heard it and they know who said it. But if it's a quote from like the artist that you're writing about, then you should have a citation in the text. If you don't want to use a footnote, we give you this easier option. If you cite a printed source or one that was originally printed, from a book or magazine or newspaper, then you would cite it this way. You see how I wrote this down. It's in parentheses, the last name of the author, only the last name, and the page number or pages from which that fact or quote was taken. So we give you a break, though. You don't have to do that every time you have a fact. Like, for instance, when was Michelangelo born? Well, I know by now, I've been teaching since 1475. But most people wouldn't know that. So then at the end of a sentence about his birth, where and when he was born, to be thorough, you ought to cite that. Where did you get that information? But we're not going to take points off if you don't do it every time. But you at least need to do it twice. And hopefully more of you, most of you would do that more often. When you have a quote or a fact that's not common knowledge, you're supposed to cite the source, but we only require it twice. So you can do this in text citation or in parentheses citation method if you prefer. And if you cite a website, this is the last part of this, and I'll take any questions. And then I'll show you the sample paper and make sure that's clear to you. If you cite a website, then you must write the URL with the title of the article. If you just put Wikipedia, how many millions of articles are there on Wikipedia? Literally millions. That's not, you're not getting credit for that. If you write Wikipedia and then the title of the article, like Michelangelo's David. I know some of you inevitably will, at least in one or both classes, write a paper about that great famous sculpture. That'd be a good example. So I gave you that one right here. See, wikipedia.com, comma, Michelangelo's David. That actually is the title of at least one article, probably more than that on Wikipedia. And that you would put in parentheses if you want to do it that way. The other choice is make it a full footnote at the bottom of the page. Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. There's still a little more to cover, though, about the requirements on how to submit the papers. But first, any questions about any of these first five? Some people joined us a little late. Let's see, is anybody else? No, there's nobody. Anybody have any questions? Anybody else about any of these requirements or anything else about the papers?
Do we have a due
Pardon?
date for the paper?
Oh, yeah, it's on your syllabus. That's a good question. Yeah, I was about to say that is 3 weeks from tonight. 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks. So my word to the wise, don't wait to the week before it's due to choose your topic. A and B should be self-evident, but it isn't always. So if you've never done paper like this, it wouldn't be probably for most of you. Pick a work of art you're passionate about or that you care about. It could be something you love that you've already known. Any work of art from any period, any style, any artist, any culture is acceptable, except your own art, because then you're cheating, because surely you know the meaning of your own art without researching it. So other than just that exception, no original art by you, the student, but it could be someone you know. That'd be all right. Someone in your family, or work of art you've had hanging on the wall of your grandmother's house or seat since you were. As long as, here are the two things I recommend you to. If it's not a famous or well-known work of art like graffiti, I have mixed feelings. Is that art? Well, yeah, it is. In some people's graffiti is greater than others, right? Like Banksy, you've all heard of him, the guy that goes around stenciling imagery, which is really not graffiti. I don't think of it as actual imagery of children and police and different people doing different things all over the world, right? Mostly in London, where some people think they know who he is. Anyway, he's world famous. There have been books about him. Okay, that'd be easy. But what if it's some other work of art that doesn't have a lot of research? You might want to pick a different work, because you do want to get an A, to double check before you start writing about a work of art that you can research it easily and find at least 3 sources to cite. And then, of course, list in your bibliography. So if it's a work that's not well known, like, I've seen some incredible graffiti, to be frank about it, in Oakland, where I drive a lot through Oakland. I have a lot of friends that live in Oakland, right next door to Berkeley, right? And you see new graffiti art on freeway underpasses or overpasses almost every time I drive through Oakland. And so, but how would you research that? You probably couldn't. So you probably wouldn't want to do a paper on that. But you choose. The point is, you have full freedom to pick a work of art, and you should care about it enough to want to know more and to share your knowledge. Two of my best papers, here we go. One was about watches, or a watch, a design of a watch company from the 1920s. It was so good that I used it for years as a sample A paper. I think I've since lost, so I don't know if I still have it. Anyway, that was an unusual subject, but it was a company that was out of Germany, I think, or maybe it was even Switzerland, anyway, wherever, place that made watches over 100 years ago. And it was an A paper because he looked at the actual watch dial and the numbers and the style of the lettering as artwork. And he was able to find sources. Another good example was the original In-N-Out burger. I wouldn't have known this until I read this paper. 1947. That's before McDonald's even had their first sort of. I don't know if you saw Michael Keaton in The Founder, the story of how McDonald's sort of was co-opting another business. It's not exactly an upside, image of the founder of McDonald's, but the guy, of course, was also very successful and famous after that. McDonald's restaurants, I don't think you probably want to write about those. In-N-Out burger, I thought this is going to be an A paper, but I graded because it was an architecture paper, and that's my area of expertise. It was excellent. The person found who the original architect was. I think it was a woman, and how they came up with the colors, and then just use the image. It isn't easy to produce an image, of course, a good, sharp, clear color image of one of those restaurants. They're all the same, right? And wrote a little background history of how the company got started. That was an A paper. And of course, she was able to get sources from the company for the research citations and the bibliography. So you have total freedom of whatever work of art you want. So I hope I don't get half a dozen emails right before the deadline. Can I write about something not on the syllabus? Yes, you can. Absolutely. You choose anything that interests you. But make sure you can find original, 3 or more original sources on it. Okay, any questions? I saw your hand, William. Yeah.
Yeah, so I assume it's the citations and the bibliography are both going to be in MLA?
Oh, no, the citations, it's a good question. So let's take a look again at number 5. Footnotes have their own standard formats. Most people don't. It's so cumbersome. So, and we want to give you reasonably flexible requirements. So for most of you, you're going to cite them within, let's actually look at a sample paper right now, which is the one I sent everybody. So hopefully you saw it. If you didn't download it or print it, you should have it in your inbox. I sent it, I think it was yesterday afternoon. But if not, you're going to see right now. See, so you could just do this with the in-text citations without using footnotes, where you use in parentheses, either if it's a printed source or even an article with any author on it from a magazine or a newspaper, which has now been digitalized. You put the author's last name and the page number. You don't have to worry about the MLA format in the in-text citations, no. Or you do the URL with the article title. So let me now show you a sample. I'm not going to go through every page, but to give you an idea, this is the cover sheet that I'm going to send all of you in about 2 weeks. In fact, I will. 1 week before the papers are due. And if you don't get it, just, hit me with an email saying I couldn't get it, I didn't see it or whatever. It shouldn't be a problem because 95% of all the students in all my classes have received each of my handouts when I send them. But if you didn't, you'll get it individually sent to you. But don't wait till the night or 2 before it's due. This is your grade sheet that me and the readers use to give you credit for each section. Can you guys see the check marks? I'll get up closer here. See, item number 2 is worth the most points. Why? Because the formal analysis has 9 elements. Remember, if you do all 9 elements, then you'll get some kind of a check, or even some people, me and the other readers, will actually write in 3 points for each of those 9 elements. Oh, but wait, 3 times 9 is 27. So how do we get to 30? You see the bottom line that you used examples for each of these elements, and you get 3 points if you did that. If you did it only on some of them, you might only get 1 point. Anyway, it adds up to 30 points. And then the top line, it's like getting credit or paid as athletes sometimes do. I guess I didn't watch the Super Bowl. It was a boring blowout from everything. My brother had bets on it. Actually bet on the wrong team. But anyway, item 1 is like, just showing up. You get 10 points for submitting the paper, right? So already you got 40 points there on the formal analysis and just turning it in. Now you get 20 points if you do at least a full page on the meaning. And your meaning is, clear. Right? Obviously, if it's not complete sentences or, it doesn't make sense, that's different. But even just, a page to a little more, 23 or more lines on the meaning, and you get 20 points for that section. Then down here, you get 10 points, you see, for the illustration. If you do the clear, I already covered this, so I'm going to keep repeating. Clear, half page or larger, the color is, it's sharp and the color is accurate. And then you get 10 points for the entire paper's length. So if you give me 4 pages, let's say, on the formal analysis and a half page on the meaning, you already lose points right off the bat before I start grading, because it doesn't meet the length requirements of each half. We covered that as the first 2 items on your 5 requirements handout. I already covered that. And if you were late, you can see this on YouTube after 7 on Friday. And then we have the last ones worth 20 points. You see how valuable it is, or how much credit you get for correctly using the MLA format in your bibliography. I already covered, sources you can use for that. And then citing your sources in the text with, let's look at a sample of how this student did it. I think she did it both on the first page. Yeah, there we go. See, Gogh, let me point to this. so that you can see it. No, it's not Gauguin. It looks like Gauguin. It's another artist. Or title, I'm sorry, another author. See that there where my finger is? And the page number. So that citation refers to a book in the bibliography, the last name of that author, or an article, I forget which, and then the page number from which that quote, you see it was a quote, was taken. So there's an example of an in-text citation. Okay, so let's look at the bibliography. All right, so you can see how they coordinate here. See, there's the book. Now, this is back when, of course, we were all in person, or at least in my classes. And so, of course, you could go to the library, and students often did. So it's a book, and you saw the reference to it in where I was pointing my finger a moment ago in the text, in the body of the paper. All you had to do was use the author's last name and the page number from which that fact or quote came. And if it's a URL, then, or a website, I'm sorry, you do the same with the URL. Remember, that has to be not just the name of the website, but the article, the title of that article you cited. And then let's look at the illustration. It's by Toulouse-Lautrec. It's one of my favorite artists.
I'm a little confused on the bibliography and the works cited because you said it's not the same thing.
That's right. Nope. They're two different things. They
But
relate
when
to
you
each other.
were pointing out at the bibliography, you were pointing out at the works cited page of the example.
Oh, you're referring to, very observant. I should cross that out, and I'll do it right now. I have to admit, this is only the second time I think that I've used this sample paper. This student made a mistake, but I told you I'd give you a little, flexibility.
Okay.
That's incorrectly. They should not have said works cited. It should say bibliography. So good observation. And that's what I'm doing right now, and I'll show it to you again. It should be bibliography, because works cited is, again, only referring to your in-text references, whether they're footnotes or the other form, which we give you the choice of the in parentheses citations. So it should have said bibliography. So good point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's my oversight that I didn't catch that before I chose this sample. So you're not going to, I told you I'll be flexible. I've always been that way, because especially if it's the first time you've written a paper in art history or any of this kind of paper with these requirements. But you ought to label it correctly so there's no confusion on your part or ours that you've met the requirement. So yes, you're correct to have pointed that out. It should have said bibliography. So the works cited were what I was pointing to, you saw a moment ago, where it was the last name of the author of one of the books and the page number. That's where the works cited are. There's no separate list for that. If you chose to do it at the bottom of the page, each page where you had in your text a fact that you took from the bibliography, that counts as a traditional footnote, which some people will do, but you're not required to. Now, these are important questions, so that's what we're here for. Any other questions? Because there's one more thing I want to show you, and you might want to take a screenshot of it, and then we'll move on to our first slides. But I don't want to rush through anything. So anybody else have any other questions about anything we just covered or anything else relating to the papers? Well, okay, because you can always email me if it's a question I haven't answered, but I think I've answered the main ones, which I would take that list of 5 requirements with you. Or have it with you when you're starting to work on your papers, and then again check with it before you submit them to make sure, did I do all these 5 things and thoroughly, correctly, cover all of them. Now, another thing you can do is when you get the cover sheet, which you will get from me 2 weeks. If I send it earlier, people lose it, or they accidentally delete it, or if they forget where it's stored in their computer. It's inevitable that it's better for me to send it to you 1 week before the papers due. So you will get this as a PDF, because your papers have to be submitted to me. In fact, it's not my rule. I've said this many times at the college. It's in general, all assignments need to be submitted as PDF. And that's the only way I can be sure I can open them all, because other formats I may or may not be able to open. And if I can't, if I have time, I'll shoot you an email saying, hey, I couldn't open your paper. Sorry, you need to resubmit as PDF. I usually do, but that's cumbersome and it's delayed, and then your paper is submitted late. So there's, by the way, what is the penalty? Minor penalty for submitting a paper late? 5 points off. out of 100, unless it's more than a week late, or sorry, 1 week, 7 days or more. That's in my, I covered that the first night of class, and it's in your course grading policy handout that I gave everybody, which is reasonable. It goes up to 10 points after 1 week. That's never goes up after that. So if you needed 3 weeks to do a paper, the most you'd have is 10 points off for being late. And of course, again, if you had an emergency and you can verify it, I do need to see some written evidence, again, not my rule, the college or district's rule, that you had either a medical or family emergency. It happens, obviously, especially, lately. Then you can just show me evidence of that in some written form, a screenshot of a prescription, a doctor's visit, a receipt for some medicine at a store. I don't know. So that would be, I'd be flexible, but you do have to show me something that's, credible, that you had an emergency, medical or family emergency, and then that gives you an extension of a week with no points off. Okay, so this cover sheet, I'm going to finish up now with this and one last thing. Whoa, sorry, I didn't mean to have it not be there. Let's get it back where you'll see it's a checklist. It quite literally is a good system for you to use. And that's why it was this. I didn't create this. This was Sarah Gill. And it's a good method. A few other teachers here used to use it. I think maybe I'm the only one left that does in the art history department at the JC. But it's a good system. I've used it at all the other colleges I taught at, and I've had students tell me it's much clearer than a lot of the other art history, cover sheets or whatever you call it. So this is what you have to have with. It needs to be part of your PDF file when I get it, or we can't grade your papers. And that's how you'll know the grade you got. You'll understand, why you got whatever points you got. And so I would use that as a checklist, as the final sort of step before you submit your papers, which is, did I do all 9 elements? Oh, wait a minute, I forgot mass, or I forgot modeling, or whatever. Or did I give examples of each one? It's all right there on the cover sheet. In essence, the same thing we just talked about is done in a summary form on 1 page, which is the cover sheet. And you'll be getting that a week before the paper's due. That gives you plenty of time to use that before you attach it to your paper and submit it. Plenty of time to use that as a checklist. You don't have to, but it's a wise thing to do to help make sure you didn't forget anything. So here we go. It looks like we need one more. You had to admit one more person. There we go. Yeah, this is the one that comes from work. Hello. Welcome. We just covered most of the requirements for the papers. So what you'll want to do is watch, anybody who didn't see all of them, you'll want to watch the video anytime after 7 p.m. on Friday for this class, week 3 or 1.2. You'll see it on YouTube, and then you'll see everything that you need to have. And plus you can then still email me after. Please wait till after you watch that video if you've missed part of it. And if you still have questions, you can email me. Okay, here's the last thing on the paper requirements. I just created this recently, in fact, tonight. That's the labeling you should use if you don't want your paper to get mixed up or maybe not graded with the others and turn back to you, a week or 2 weeks later. You want to get your grade in a timely fashion. I can't promise this anymore. I used to say 2 weeks from the day you submit your paper, if it's on time, if it's submitted on the deadline, you'll get your grade back. I can't say that. It's a little too complicated now with the way things are with the Zoom system and all the other components of digital teaching and grading. But usually I have them back from my readers, or I always do grade the ones I get and grade within 2 weeks of the day that they were submitted. But this is important if you want your papers graded in a timely fashion and not mixed up and maybe even lost somehow, because you submit them as a PDF to Mark W at AOL. I don't use Canvas. I've said that now like a couple times. I'll say it again. I'm not the only teacher. I know that. I just heard that from one of my readers. She just told me, oh, this is about 2 of my 5 classes where the teacher chooses not to use Canvas because it's so, it's a good system, but it's very cumbersome. It adds another whole layer of complexity that's already enough for someone, obviously, who, in my case, never used digital teaching methods until last semester. So I'm trying to avoid confusion and complexity and things going astray. If you submit them, I will send you an email twice before the deadline. When I send the cover sheet, and again just before the deadline, so you'll have plenty of reminders. You send them to my AOL, Mark W at AOL, which is where most of you sent your mini bios. And then see, I have your email stored so I can send you your grade back quickly that way. And that's what you write. You see here? You want to take a screenshot perhaps, or otherwise just, review this as a video later. Obviously, this is our 1.2. It's the same method for 1.1, but here we are in 1.2. So I changed the 1.1 to 1.2. Short paper number 1, underline, then last name, comma, first name. If you do it that way, it will get correctly logged in. It will be easy to open as a PDF, and it'll be graded more quickly. Okay, that is a requirement if you want to make sure. I'll give you an example. One of the students here was a, obviously no names will be mentioned, a high school advanced placement student. I think he was only 16, and he and his mom took the class, the same section. But he didn't get credit for his last 2 assignments because he didn't send them to the right address. And somehow he made a mistake. I don't know where they went. They didn't go to me or to the campus website because I checked both. So I thought he just, couldn't finish the class, and it was just, going to take an incomplete. He never contacted me. And I send notices to people saying, I don't have all of your assignments here. So he ended up not passing the class, but now he found out what happened. So you see, he's already got a delay in getting his credit for that course because I haven't yet received them. So he's going to have to reformat them and prove that he sent them originally on time, but to the wrong address. Why do that for yourself? To avoid that, just use this. Anybody need me to hold it up again? It's pretty straightforward. But if you don't do that, or you submit it as other than a PDF, or you submit it to any other website besides my AOL account, it will have a much higher probability or possibility of not getting logged in correctly and on time and graded in a timely fashion.
So
Yes.
just one more time. So only PDF files. That's the only thing.
Yes, that's the college requirement because they're
email address.
universally openable. Yeah, if you send me a screenshot or a JPEG, I may or may not be able to open it. And I'm pretty easygoing. I hope all of you have noticed that. I've been told by other teachers I'm too lenient, and even some of my readers have said, you should be stricter about all these things. If I can open it, I probably will go ahead and grade it. But if I can't, I'm not going to futz with it. I might or might not have time. I get literally scores of these papers all at once within a few days anyway from my 2 classes, because the other class is way larger than this one's 47 or 48 students. So at this point, I end up with, very limited time to follow up to people that didn't submit them right. So you're risking my not having even seen your paper if you don't do that. So yes, it really is a requirement. But if I can actually open it, I might give you a break on the first paper and say, please, next time submit it as a PDF, or I won't be able to even log it in. But don't take that chance. It's not worth it. And it's be kind to your instructor and yourself, please, to, yes, in other words, answer your question. It really is a requirement. Otherwise, you're risking not getting credit for something you put a lot of work into. Or not getting the grades you thought you were going to get by the end of the semester, and then having to contact me. I don't know why the guy waited a month after I submitted the grades just this week. Oh, what happened to me? Well, I tried to give you a heads up and I never heard from you. So perhaps he just was AWOL, for the last few weeks and submitted his papers from, some other city or state to the wrong website in the wrong format. So now he's reformatting them. I assume that I'll be able to give him a grade change form. But if he was applied for a scholarship or admittance to a college, a 4-year college, I would have had no choice. I had no choice, I'm sorry, but to give him an F. And I didn't want, he actually did a good job on the 2 papers he submitted correctly, and then somehow didn't on the last 2. So just don't do that to yourself if you can avoid it at all. Yes, PDFs, but again, not my requirement, but it is a requirement. All right, any other questions about the papers? Because I think we spent a lot of time on them. Let's do at least the first 3 slides. That should be about right, and then take our break. And now, like I said before, some of you hadn't joined us yet, we're going to go past the 6 slides that are on tonight's list, because look how many there are from next week. It's a long list. So we're going to do at least Da Vinci and maybe possibly one of the other 2 artists before, so that we'll have a less cumbersome list of slides. Because next week and from now on, every lecture is going to be about the artwork, and as well as some of my own slides of some of these places that I've been to where you don't need to take notes. But that's only, you know, every few weeks or so. And then I'll tell you heads up that night. Oh, tonight we're going to end with the must-know slides and the note-taking extra early. And the last 20 minutes or 15 or whatever, you'll see some of my own slides. Or else I intersperse them sometimes through the lectures. I always tell you, so let's go ahead and get started. When it's time, now it will be, to start taking notes. And we call that the must-know slides. So this will be the first one for tonight. Okay, and then let me hide the thumbnail. I think it's here. Yeah. All right, and then get this up large. Okay. So this is the first must know for tonight. So everyone be taking notes. This slide is very important, and I always tell you this. Each lecture, whether, you know, a certain slide, a handful, 2, 3, 4, maybe in any given night, or lecture, are going to be not very, I can't speak, would definitely not be removed from the study list. That means that they're very high possibility of being on the test, on, in this case, the midterm. So this is one of those. Not going to cut it from the study list. So you want to take good notes. Okay, David, simple, easy title, one word. David, by Donatello, 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 and the date is 1428. So let's start out with who was Donatello. He was the first great sculptor, that is as in a person, that's T-O-R, not T-U-R-E, the first great sculptor of the Renaissance. Nobody argues with that. There's no question. He helped introduce all kinds of techniques for sculpture, or reintroduce is a better way to say it. So I'll say it again. He reintroduced many new techniques, or just say many techniques for sculpture that were used throughout the rest of the Renaissance, or just say by all other Renaissance art sculptors. We're talking about people now. I'll say it again. He was the first great sculptor of the Renaissance, and he reintroduced many techniques, or just say several techniques that were used by other sculptors throughout the Renaissance. That's a 200-year period. That's a big chunk of time. So obviously he was very influential, and therefore his work inspired many others. You'll see the evidence as we go through the next couple of weeks. Okay, but why is this the work of art we're picking for him? Because it broke new ground. And there's a word for that. You don't need to know this word for the exam, but for those of you who are interested in art in the future, it's called a seminal work of art. It broke new ground. But just keep it simple in your notes and say this piece introduced a couple of, or a number, just say a number of new techniques. The first one is that it's the first life-size freestanding sculpture since ancient Roman times. Well, that couldn't be any more important. Again, I'll repeat it. This is the first, it was the first life-size freestanding sculpture since ancient Roman times, in what, 1500 years. That is, that the Romans knew how to do these freestanding figures. You see, he's not leaning against the wall, a tree trunk, a column, or anything else. But no one else, after Rome fell, the artists in Europe, well, it was the Dark Ages, right? They didn't know how to do this. So any sculpture you see in a Gothic or earlier medieval church is going to be not freestanding, of course. So it's a freestanding figure, life-size. So again, the first life-size freestanding sculpture since ancient Rome. That's one major breakthrough, or new reintroducing of ancient technique. Another one, and here we go, tonight's list of terms to know. There are a couple long ones tonight, so I will say the definition slowly and repeat them. Okay, and that is Contraposto. This is in Contraposto. Oh, did I forget to put that on here? If I did, you guys get a break. Yep. Let's see. You get a break. But you need to write it for this slide, because this slide has that. I will spell it for you slowly, but you don't have to worry if it's not on the syllabus. Remember, the spelling isn't going to have points off if you get close enough that I know what you're trying to say. words that are on the syllabus, to get full credit, you have to spell correctly on the tests. After all, they're in your notes and you have the open book, right? Exams in this class. All right, so Contraposto, Contrapposto, Contrapposto, Contraposto. Yes, it's a 4-syllable, or is it 5? Italian word. Sorry, there are a lot of those in the Renaissance, but we only have a few in this class. So what is Contrapposto? It was a pose for sculpture, right? In which the figure has 3 human figures, of course, in which the human figure has 3 features, and here they are. This is what the meaning of this slide is, largely related to this. So if this was on the essay part of the midterm, to get full credit on the answer for this, for the meaning, you would want to write this. What are those 3 features? Contrapposto. Okay. First, okay, is that one arm is raised, and I'll point to it with the cursor. Here we go. One arm is raised and the other is down, usually holding something. One arm is raised and the other is down, usually holding. He's holding a sword here. We'll talk about who he is in the other part of the meaning in just a moment. Okay, and then we have the weight. The second feature is the weight is on the back leg. He's standing on this leg. The weight is on the back leg, and the front leg is loose. He might be touching the head of Goliath. That's who that is, that right? This guy with the helmet here. He might be touching it. You see it there, but his weight is on the back leg. So again, the second feature of Contrapposto is that the weight is on the back leg and the front leg is loose. And the third feature is that the spine forms a gentle S curve. The spine forms a gentle S curve. This piece is the first one to reintroduce Contrapposto. The ancient Greeks and Romans invented, actually the ancient Greeks invented it. You don't have to know that fact, but when I said reintroduced, remember what's a Renaissance? That I already gave you guys. That definition is an important one. It could appear on the true false portion of the midterm. That's reintroducing of, right, or revival is a better way to say, revival of ancient classical art. Well, that's what this is. The Romans and the Greeks had used freestanding sculpture. The Greeks invented Contrapposto. So this guy is the first artist in the Renaissance to reintroduce those things, which is why we call him the first great artist of the Renaissance. Okay, that's the first part of the meeting. The other part is what's going on here. Some of you know.
Wait, hold on. Before you continue, yeah, what was that? What was that last feature?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sure. Number 3, right, is the spine forms a gentle S curve. You see that if you follow the outline. If you could see its spine itself, you could see how it goes out and then, I mean, in and then out and then in again. Again, the spine forms a gentle S, S-shaped curve. And that's the way we really stand. Why do artists do that? Why did the Greeks invent that? And then the Renaissance reintroduced it? Because it's how people really stand. We don't stand like the Egyptian sculptures where everybody's just ramrod stiff upright, like the Pharaoh sculptures of pharaohs and things in ancient Egypt. I mean, they weren't realistic. People don't stand like that. This is how people stand in real life when they're relaxing, right? Okay. Yes.
Just to make sure I have everything, could you go over I wrote down the 3 different figures, but could you go over the full definition for Contrapposto again, just to make sure I have
Okay. Yeah, I will quickly because we got to pick up the pace. But yes, number 1 is one arm. It doesn't matter the order, by the way.
I have the 3 things. I just needed the definition you said before that. It's a pose for sculpture in which.
Okay. A pose for sculpture which has 3 features. Sorry.
Got it.
And
Okay.
you wrote them. Oh, excellent. Very good. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. No, that's good. That's what we're here for. Okay. So in other words, I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate the definition verbatim, but if this slide is on the slide analysis portion of the midterm, and I'll explain how to study for the test, we'll do a review, we'll cover all of that the week before the midterm. And that's the 9th week. So you've got some time. then to get full credit, you would have to describe those three features because they're all here. And that's part of the meaning. Okay, what's the other part of the meaning? Who was David? I think most of you know, but if you don't, then you need to write this. He is a figure from the Bible, right? Who fought a giant named Goliath and killed him with one blow of a stone. In fact, it quite literally is right there is the stone he used to throw, a slingshot. Of course, he didn't throw it with his hand, but you don't have to get that detailed. You could just say he killed a giant, an enemy soldier who was a giant, like twice his size, right? And there's the head of Goliath right down there. You see, with his dead eyes, right? And so he's standing after he won the battle. So that's the last things about the meaning. This depicts David, a figure from the Bible, after he defeated and killed the giant Goliath. And that's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of explanation needed on that. All right. Unless if you don't know that, just write it. But most people know that story from the Bible. So this illustrates that story. But there is one last fact about the meaning. Why was this sculpture created? Because the city, here we go, the last fact you should write in your notes under meaning. The city of Florence was being threatened by a larger neighbor or enemy, just say enemy, city, of course, another city. There was no country of Italy then, you know that, everybody knows. There were just a bunch of cities, city-states. So just say the city of Florence was being threatened by a larger enemy city. And this was commissioned by the city of Florence as a statement. And here we go. Here's what statement. If you attack us, Florence was saying to its enemy, we'll do to you what David did to Goliath. And some people think that's why they never attacked that city. If you want to know which one it was, is Milan, a huge city, way bigger than Florence. But just, you can keep it simple, say, I'll repeat that this statue was commissioned by the city of, city government, you can just say city of Florence as a piece of political propaganda. That's how I'd write it. Or you can just say as a statement to an enemy, a larger city, neighboring city. And the message they want to send was, if you attack us, we'll do to you what David did to Goliath. So it's pretty straightforward. Now, there is another aspect of the meaning, but we're running short on time, and that is of the personal life of, but I'll mention it. You don't have to write this. You have plenty about the meaning already. But if you want to, you could write this, that Donatello was openly gay back when that was not only considered, quote, a sin, unquote, against the Catholic Church, right? Said it was a sin, but it was illegal. But he was so important, such a great artist, and so popular and influential, he didn't worry about it. He was openly gay. And this model was one of his, for the sculpture, was one of his gay, almost certainly most historians believe, one of his gay lovers. It wouldn't cause a controversy now, well, at least not in California. But back then it could have, and yet he just didn't worry about it because the Catholic Church looked the other way, because they wanted to have him make sculptures for them and for the city of Florence and for private rich donors. And, so he was so successful and so popular that he was able to lead an openly gay lifestyle back when it was very dangerous for most people. Okay, formal analysis. Well, it's not cool or warm. It's black marble, which is by definition neutral. All of the simulated texture, look how well done it is in the face, the hair, the muscles, the hands, is done with carved line. So there's carved line here, and there's the simulated texture. I just gave you the examples, right? But there is the real texture of the smooth bronze too. I think I said bronze. I hope I said bronze. Black bronze is the material. So that's the real smooth texture of the material. And you can see that the texture is smooth and it's real, but it has simulated texture. All sculpture has that. All realistic figures of any kind of object or person or animal have both. I already covered this with the first or second night of class. You remember that when you talk about simulated textures in a sculpture, you should also add a sentence, if you want a full credit in your answers, under formal analysis, that there is also the real smooth texture, as I just stated, of bronze here. Okay, it's several masses. He's the largest, David, then the head of Goliath, and then the sword. It's pretty straightforward. And you could even say the fourth largest mass is the stone, if you want to get that detail. But you only have to give me the three largest masses to get credit on that. One of the 9 elements. Okay, what about balance? Well, of course it's balance. It's a human body that's intact with 2 arms, 2 legs, right? Complete human body, and he's standing, upright. So it is both stable as far as dynamic and stable goes. It's stable because he's standing upright, but you see his arms are stretched out, right? And they have diagonals. And then we have the S curve by definition. He's standing in Contraposto, so his spine is slightly curved. And that means he's both stable in terms of the overall pose, but dynamic in the details. You could even say, oh, he's wearing a hat, by the way. A flowered hat. Yeah, that's what the model was posing with. I don't know. That's what Donatello asked him to put that on. I doubt the real David in the ancient biblical battle was wearing a hat with flowers. But anyway, that's a detail, of course, and that's dynamic, as you could say are the arms and the spine. But he is both stable and dynamic because he's standing upright. And then we have the technique for space. It's a life-size figure of a human being, but there is overlapping. So it's the real space of the figure, 6 feet tall, by the way. And then we have the overlapping of the hand over the sword, right? And the hat over the head, and his feet, or 1 foot, actually 1 foot over the head. So there is some overlapping, but mostly it's the real space of the figure. And there's no technique for modeling. It's, of course, the lighting from the museum is what causes the modeling. Okay, and there's rhythm. It's a human body, so it's got 2 arms, 2 legs. And of course, there's rhythm in the face. Okay, we covered this last week. This is a really important slide now. The next must know. Okay. It's called Holy Trinity. 2 words. Holy, and Trinity is Trinity. Holy Trinity. The artist's name is Masaccio. And now spell that slowly. Masaccio. 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 1425. Why are we looking at this painting? Because this is the first known. There's only way to write it. I'll say it twice. So you want to write it just like this. If it's on the exam, you'd want to remember this part of the meaning. Of course, I always start with the meaning. That this is the first known painting to use scientific perspective. Well, you couldn't get more important than that because it was a brand new technique. The ancient Greeks and Romans didn't know how to do that. So this, again, I'll repeat that, is the first known painting to use scientific perspective. It has a vanishing point. We already defined what scientific perspective is last week, and you should all have seen that. Certainly, if you weren't at the lecture, you should have seen it on the video on YouTube by now. I explained how that, technique works. Well, so let's get up close and see what's going on here. Well, the title gives us a hint. The Holy Trinity. It's a phrase from the Catholic Church that refers to 3 holy figures. God, there's God up above everybody. See, supposedly he's looking down from heaven. Jesus, his son. And then this is the one that interests me, the Holy Spirit. It's in the form of a dove, a white bird. You don't have to say dove. You can just say a white bird, which a lot of people look at this painting. They think that's just the collar or the undershirt underneath God's robes. No, it's not. It's actually a bird with the wings. He's stretched out. So just keep it simple and say that there's the third figure or feature of the Holy Trinity, 3 holiest figures to the Catholic Church: God the Father, you can just say God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, which is what God sends messages to earth through this Holy Spirit, supposedly, according to the Bible. So those are the Holy Trinity, those 3 figures in the upper half. Who are these people? Well, we don't know and we don't care, but someone's done the research. These are the donors who gave the money to the church to pay the artist. So they got their schnozzes in, basically, look at them, in the painting because they're rich and they wanted to be in the painting. So, hey, he who has the gold makes the rules, right? So it's common in the Renaissance for the donor, the person, the patron is the other word to use, either word will do, to have themselves shown in the painting. And there they are. Now, these 2 are Mary, mother of Jesus, his mother, and one of the other disciples. We don't know who, one of Jesus's other disciples. Okay, the only other thing to say about this, about the scientific perspective, is how do we know that this had a common vanishing point? It's pretty easy. Look at these lines formed on the ceiling, on these panels, right between each set of panels. If you drew those lines to a vanishing point, they would meet down just below Jesus's feet. Here we go. On the cross. If you were to take those lines and continue drawing them, you see where my arrow is? They would all meet down here. And then the other lines come from the stairs. You see the edges of the stairs. They would also. So it has a common vanishing point, which is the definition of scientific perspective, that all these diagonal lines, they were painted originally onto the wall. This is a fresco. I probably should start with that. On the wall of a church in Florence. You could just say Italy. So it's a fresco, painting on the wall of a church in Italy. And it's the first one we can definitely identify as having used, because Masaccio left diaries about his work. And so we know that he used that technique. And there's no painting before this that we can say that for sure. So that makes this a really important painting. And it's not going to be cut from the study list. Any questions? I hear somebody. Okay. All right. That's the meaning, most of it. I'm keeping it fairly simple on this one. The last one there was more to say about because, of course, of the political aspects and the design quality of that sculpture. But this one is pretty straightforward. The main point of the meaning is the scientific perspective that's used and who the figures are. Now, you could add that Masaccio also used models. If you want, you don't have to write this, but one more fact you might want to write about the meaning is that Masaccio had his models pose nude, and then he added the clothes himself after they'd finished posing. Now that sounds odd, but he called that a technique. He called it clothed nudes, 2 words, which is an unusual concept, but a lot of other Renaissance artists started using that idea after him. You know, this is a good 100 years before, or close to 100 years before Michelangelo, or at least 75 years before Michelangelo began creating his famous paintings. So this guy was breaking new ground is the point. He was introducing the idea of scientific perspective, of course, and his figures are quite realistic. So let's now do a formal analysis. The simulated textures are superb. Look at them on Jesus's skin. And of course, those are created with painted line. It's not carved or drawn, it's painted around the edges of his body here, right? And the cross and the ceiling, right? So painted line is used. And it's mostly thin outline. I don't see too much bold outline here, not really. I mean, maybe around the top of the cross, but most of it is thin on the human figure, certainly. And then we have the rhythm of the arms, there we go, and legs and the heads, of course. The halos on the holy figures, Mary, Jesus, God. One thing God would need a halo. Everybody know who he was when they look at him, but anyway, there it is. And then there's, here, this figure has also a halo. It's kind of hard to see. So those create rhythm, as do the folds of the robes on the 4 figures below Jesus, right? And then we see the ceiling. There's a lot of rhythm on that, though, all those panels. It's completely symmetrical. Look at it. It's like most architecture, especially in the Renaissance. Everything is balanced at 2 columns. And the ceiling, you know, you divide down the middle, it's got exactly the same. It's bilateral symmetry, you can say it that way, or just totally balanced left to right. Is it balanced top to bottom? Well, it depends on how you look at it. That's a lot of heavy mass. To me, that weighs as much as everything above Jesus's arms. That's the halfway point. You see, left, top to bottom. But you might think of the human figures as being heavier visually, weighing it toward the bottom. If you do, I'd accept that. You would just need to explain that if it's on the exam. So I see it, though, as balanced roughly top to bottom, because this has about the same mass to me as the whole bottom half below Jesus's cross, the arms, I mean, of the cross. Okay, the colors are warm on the, you know, part of the ceiling there. And of course, on Jesus's skin, all human skin tones, the faces of the figures. And on the clothing, we've got the donors, you know, cool blue here, cool blue on Mary, the robes, warm on the other donor, the man or husband, and here on this saint. And then God, look, he's wearing a two-tone, it's very odd. to me. I don't know why the artist did that, but one side of his robes is a dark green. That's cool, of course. And then the other side is a pinkish red. And of course, that's warm. So it's a mixture of both. It is almost entirely stable, except for the ceiling. Let's back up. The ceiling, of course, has a curve to it. So that's dynamic. But the figures are almost, even Jesus' arms are out almost totally straight, as much as they can be in this kind of a pose. And the floor, right, or the stairs and the floor below, and the walls, you know, with the columns, that's all stable. The figures are upright, all of them. So it's mostly stable. In the bottom half, it's almost entirely stable, but there are dynamic details in the upper part. And the textures are very strong and realistic, as are the modeling on Jesus's body, especially, right? His upper half, especially, and as well on even the architecture. You see some modeling on the columns here, right? This is discoloration, if you're curious. You see that there? That's from 600 years of this being out in the open, as a fresco would be, of course. So there's modeling on the robes of the figures. It's all strong and realistic modeling and strong smear texture on the clothing, the hair, the skin. All right, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to skip this one. It's not on the syllabus, and we got to kind of pick up the pace. It's another Masaccio of a scene from the Bible. It's amazing when you know what you're looking at. It's called the tribute money, but you don't have to write any of this. But it's Jesus at the moment where he met Peter, his first disciple, the old guy with the white hair and the beard. He's always shown that way. And he tries to get him to join his, you know, well, it's not a crusade, but right, his ministry, his wandering around preaching. And that's a scene in the Bible, an important scene. And the background, this artist never went to Israel. I've been there. That's on the Sea of Galilee. It looks just like that. I don't know, don't write this, but it's amazing. How did Masaccio, a man who never left Italy, know how the hills above the Sea of Galilee in Israel, thousands of miles or 1,500 miles away, he knew how they looked. Maybe he had a vision, who knows? Okay, now I'm trying to decide if we should jump to this one. Yeah, let's do this one. Birth of Venus. Oh, this is so famous. I think this will take us to the break here. Birth of Venus. Venus, of course, you don't know, like the planet. Botticelli, the artist, you should have all heard of him. Botticelli. Botticelli, 1484. Well, Botticelli was one of the most famous artists of the High Renaissance. And let me give you that definition. Now, that is on your handouts, okay? So we're going to look at two definitions that both are related to this work of art. High Renaissance is the bottom of your first page of the list of terms to know. High Renaissance was that period during the Italian Renaissance, when the best and most famous works by the greatest artists of the Renaissance, the best and most famous works by the greatest artists, plural, of the Renaissance were created. That's it. Again, the period from 1480 to 1520, during which the greatest, you could just say the best and most famous, that's probably the best way. Yeah, best and most famous works by the greatest artists, plural, of the Renaissance were created. Every famous thing from the Renaissance you've seen, it's like 90% of it was done during that 40 years. Nobody knows why. It was something in the pasta or the Chianti, I don't know, the air in Italy at the time. It's just amazing how many famous works of art that you've heard of from the Renaissance, if you've seen any, were created all in that period, that very limited, 40 years. And that's not even, what is that? That's 20% out of the total of the 200 years. The Renaissance lasted 200 years. So it's an amazing achievement that in one country, it's even northern Italy, it's even one part of one country, that all these great works of art were created in the same period. It's amazing. Okay, this is by Botticelli, a scene from ancient mythology. And if you don't know who Venus was, then you need to write this. I know some of you do. She was the ancient goddess of love and female beauty. There are more powers that she had, but that's enough for the notes for this class. She was the ancient goddess right? Greek goddess of love and female beauty. There she is, of course, obviously in the middle. So it's a scene from ancient mythology. That's already controversial. The Catholic Church didn't want you to think about ancient mythology. So that got the artist in trouble. But the more important reason he was in trouble was her full nudity. You see that? That wouldn't have shocked the ancient Greeks or Romans. And later on in the Renaissance, it didn't shock anybody. Michelangelo was only 9 years old when this was done, but he would soon start doing full nudity in his sculpture. But this is one of the first works of art, here's how to write that, that broke two major taboos or rules, if you want to write that way, of the Catholic Church. One is depicting a scene from ancient mythology, which I just described as the birth of the goddess Venus from ancient Greek mythology. A, that's controversial, and B, full female nudity being shown. He was asked to explain this painting, and it could easily have been destroyed. It could have destroyed his career. He had to explain to the Catholic Church how it was appropriate for him, or why was it appropriate. And here's the only other definition we'll have before the break. It's not too long. Neoplatonic art. It's on your first page, just above High Renaissance. Neoplatonic art. What is that? This is, just say, one of the first examples of Neoplatonic art, which is this is the definition. It's a style of Renaissance painting in which the figures have a dual identity. In which the figures have a dual identity. One of them is a Christian identity, and the other is an ancient mythological identity. So what does that tell us? That this must be a two-part meaning. Each figure has two identities. We already know who she is. I already told you that's Venus. But who is the Christian identity? Mary, Virgin Mary. If you buy that, you see what it, I think this is a CYA, you know the phrase, to cover himself, that after he was in trouble with the Catholic Church, but no one can prove that. He made these ideas up, but many historians say, oh, no, he intended this all along. So just keep it simple and say, he explained this painting and was able to, quote, show it. Of course, it was shown in public. It has been ever since. It's on the wall of a museum in Florence. So he was allowed to show the painting and did not get in trouble because he explained it this way. He said, well, here are my dual identities for each figure. First, Venus has the identity of a Christian figure, Mary, mother of Jesus, okay? All right, if you accept that, then you move on to who are these? These are the wind gods from ancient mythology. Well, there are no wind gods in the Bible, so he just said they were angels from heaven coming down to bless Mary. No, never in the Bible is Mary nude. But then this is the part that I think the last thing to write about the meaning on this. Who is this? Well, it's the ancient goddess of spring who's about to give her a robe to cover her nudity, right? In the myth, that's how, when she first appears, Venus on a seashell, riding on a sea of sperm. That's what that is. That's supposed to be. You see why it was controversial? That's supposed to be Zeus's sperm. Zeus, of course, most of you know, was the head god of ancient Greek mythology. So she's riding on he creates her, and she comes out of this sea of his sperm and rises up, onto the shore. Well, then she's covered with this robe by the ancient goddess of spring. So what is the Christian identity of that goddess? John the Baptist. Now that one I find hard to believe that the Catholic Church swallowed that explanation, but they did. It's, okay, then it's acceptable. And this painting was given a green light, literally. It was, permission is the right word, to be displayed in public, where it has been ever since for over 500 years. Anybody here been to Florence? Anybody? I thought a couple of you said you've been to Italy. Well, if you ever go, that's a museum you want to go to. It's the Uffizi Gallery, but you wouldn't have to know the name. You could just say, where is the painting, the museum with the painting of Venus? Because it's got so many other very famous paintings by other artists. But this is one of the first ones. It's an early high Renaissance painting in Neoplatonic style. That's the whole meaning. Then we'll do a formal analysis and take our break. This is balance because she's in the middle, and these two figures, the area covered by them, sets of figures, whatever the two here and the one there, as wide as they are, they're about the same width. But some people think it's weighted more toward the right because of the trees and the landscape. I wouldn't argue with that. So you could just say it's somewhat weighted or balanced because of the background towards the right. She is both stable and dynamic. Her upper part of her body is stable, but her head is slightly tilted and her legs are. So she's, the trees are stable, right? And then we have the dynamic figures on either side. They're not stable, right? Because there are so many diagonal lines and curves in their bodies. The simulated texture, like all Renaissance paintings, you could just give that it's a given that every Renaissance painting is a realistic style painting. That means that the simulated textures on the hair, the skin, even the seashell, yes, the sea of, you could just say sea if you want to keep it simple, but yeah, it is the sea of sperm, and the leaves on the trees are realistic, sharp and realistic, as is the modeling on the human bodies. The rhythm is obvious with the arms, legs, the seashell, the waves here on this sea, and of course the trees and their leaves, and the clothing. So there's a lot. Now it's all thin outline. Most Renaissance paintings, except Michelangelo, or before Michelangelo, most Renaissance paintings did not have thick or bold lines. These are all thin lines. Okay, and then we have the largest mass. That's hard to say. It could be the sea she's riding in on. It could be the seashell, but most people think of that as this figure here, i.e., the goddess spring / John the Baptist, this figure, if you count as one figure. And then I guess some people think that looks like one mass. So you decide. I give you total freedom on what you see for the masses. Well, what about space? Then we'll do color and space and we'll call it a break. Take a break. For space, there is overlapping, foreshortening, not too much, but a little bit on the seashell here, and diminishing size, absolutely, on the landscape, right? On these pieces of land jutting out. And then there is scientific perspective. By this time, artists were all using vanishing points. All Renaissance artists were. And so it has a common vanishing point on the horizon. There's no atmospheric perspective. There's no bluer, hazier look. He just chose not to use that. On some of his paintings he did. So again, overlapping, foreshortening, diminishing size, and scientific perspective are the techniques used. And then the last thing I'll mention is the colors. He used pale, or not pale, but just say pastel. There we go. That's the word. Pastel shades. That's a signature design technique of his style. He liked, the artist Botticelli, to use softer or more pastel tones, but nonetheless, you still need to finish up here, say which tones are warm. All the skin tones. The seashell and the sea itself are cool, white, off-white, and blue. The trees also cool because they're green, shades of green. And then the human figures, the hair and the skin are mostly warm, of course, as are the robes here. And then this robe is warm. Okay, let's take our break. We'll start again at 8:20. All right. And then we still have quite a few more important ones. So don't go away. All right. See you in a bit. 15 minutes. Okay. Okay. We're going to cover the remaining 3 slides from this week's list, and probably just the first 2 of Da Vinci, but they're pretty important. Obviously, Da Vinci is extremely important from the beginning of next week. And then I will probably cut during next week's lecture at least one of the remaining slides from week 4 as we go along. I haven't decided which ones, possibly 2. So that we don't, have to run right up till the end, till 9:30. We should be in slightly early tonight. Okay, this is not a must know. I just wanted to show it to you because I think some people may have heard of this incident. It actually is the subject of at least half a dozen documentaries, and I think a feature movie, but I think it wasn't released yet, about a true story of the greatest art theft in the history of the United States. It occurred at a museum in Boston. You have to know any of this. Called the Gardner Museum, which I've been to. If you go there now, there are 18 blank spaces on the wall where there were paintings, and you can see the outline of the original frame of the painting, where the coloration, of the wall paint on the wall has changed behind the painting. Why are they missing? Because in 1990, my gosh, that's over 30 years ago now, some very clever thieves figured out how to disguise themselves as guards, get into the museum at night, tape the mouths of and tie the hands of the actual security guards. I don't know how they overpowered them. You know, somehow they did, locked them in a closet and then stole the 18, they knew what they were doing, the 18 most valuable paintings in the entire museum, each one of which was worth 30 years ago, several $1,000,000, tens of millions, and the total value is estimated to be between $3 to $5 billion worth of paint now, today, because art, as you know, keeps going up in price at auctions and things. This is one of the works they stole. It's another Botticelli. You don't have to know, it's not on syllabus. It's a lovely painting about baby Jesus blessing, you know, this is an angel supposedly carrying a symbol of, you don't need to know, it's called Madonna of the Eucharist. Madonna being the mother of, you know, obviously Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary of baby Jesus, and his hand raised in a blessing type of pose. So that painting alone was probably worth 20 million even back then. It's hard to say how much it'd be worth now. None of those paintings, the bottom line is, has ever turned up. Tips are given every 3 or 4 years, every few years. The FBI gets anonymous tips, and they show up at a warehouse or somewhere where they think they're going to retrieve a couple of the paintings, and they're fake, they're forgeries, and they arrest the people that are trying to pass off these forgeries. It's a very interesting case, and no clues have ever led to the apprehension of anybody involved in that theft. I think they're sitting in the basement, the wine cellar of some rich collector who hired, it's called designer theft. It's an actual phrase the FBI uses. Who knows? You know, we can speculate which rich person would have the taste to know what the 18 most valuable paintings in that museum were. Anyway, that's just a little anecdote for you. Okay, this is a must know. This isn't not one I'm saying for sure I won't cut, but I think you'll find it's easier to remember the meaning of this because it's so universal, and it's a particularly literally touching, right, painting. The title, Old Man and His Grandchild. That's Stockstead again. I'll use her title always, unless there's an overriding reason why I feel I should use the more commonly accepted title. But we'll use her title again. The title she gives is Old Man and His Grandchild. Well, guess what? We know who these people are, and that was his grandson. So Old Man and Grandson is what everybody else calls it. It's in the Louvre. This is my own photo of it. It's one of my favorite paintings of all time. And it is particularly powerful when you know the meaning. The artist's name is Ghirlandaio, Ghirlandaio, Ghirlandaio. I'll spell it again, Ghirlandaio. 1480 is the year. Sorry, someone had a question? Okay. The point is, who was Ghirlandaio? There's two, as usual, at least two parts of the meaning. Ghirlandaio was the most important painter of his generation. He taught both Da Vinci and Michelangelo as young art students how to paint. You can't get more important than that, and I bet nobody in this Zoom class has heard of him except perhaps me and one or two other people. I didn't know who he was until I started teaching this class. I never heard of him, but he was extremely important. Obviously, if he's the one that taught the two greatest painters of the entire Renaissance, he had to be pretty skilled. Why do we now look at this one of his he did hundreds of paintings? Because of the universal, powerful meaning behind this painting. So let's get up close to it and we'll see what's going on. Okay. This is a secular painting. So here's part of the meaning. It is one of the first famous secular painting. That's a good word to know. Many of you already know what it means. It's a short definition. It's on your list of terms to know. Secular means of or having to do with everyday life, period. That's it. Anything that's of or having to do with everyday life. You could also put in parentheses, non-religious. Every other painting we've seen had a religious theme, didn't it? So far in this class, all the other Renaissance paintings. So this, I'll say it again, is just say one of the first famous secular paintings. This artist painted a lot of religious scenes. You had to survive. You couldn't eat if you didn't. During the Renaissance, if you were a painter, you had to paint what the Catholic Church told you to paint or asked you to paint. But you could also paint if you were successful enough, like this guy, obviously he was. He taught Michelangelo and Da Vinci. You could choose to paint things that had nothing to do with religion or the Catholic Church. This clearly has no religious meaning. What is the scene? The main part of the meaning is it depicts a young grandson. That's a boy. They had long hair then, and he's wealthy, so he's wearing fancy cap, going to visit his grandfather who is dying of cancer. That nose is clearly infected with cancer. We know the facts about who these people were, so I don't know why Stockstead doesn't want to just call it Old Man and Grandson, but we'll play along with her title. So he, the little boy, obviously it's all part of the meaning now, is looking up at his grandfather. And I'm going to now pause and see, is anybody, there's no right or wrong here, just whatever you think or what you see. What do you think is in the mind of this little boy? What's his, what thoughts would he have? Or feelings would he have? You have clues here. I can back up and you probably see it even better. Whoops. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do this. I meant to go back to the other view. Yeah, these are my own slides from the Louvre. Okay, look at the body language, the placement of the little boy's hand. Look at the expression on his face and in his eyes, and the grandfather. Anybody guess what the thoughts and feelings are that are being expressed here? Yeah, go ahead.
If I had to take a gander, I would say that the grandson, that's a look and body language of inquisitiveness and concern. That's what immediately jumps out to me.
Okay.
And as for the grandfather, I see a very paternal stare as he's looking at his grandson.
Yeah. Okay,
And
those
he-
both are
he-
accurate to the degree that you stated, and wouldn't dispute those. So you could say that's part of the meaning. But I think the universal feeling or emotion, excuse me, the artist is trying to convey a universal human emotion. The little boy, I've had students, understandably, look at this painting. Now, if you were at the Louvre and you looked at it up close like this, you would have no doubt the little boy's expression is mostly, or meant, the artist is trying to convey unconditional love between the little boy and his grandfather. He knows his father told him, the kid's probably 5 or 6 or whatever, that his grandfather's dying and won't be around much longer. And he's come to visit. Look, they're out in the country, obviously. So they came from probably the city, Florence. This is painted very obvious. We know where it was painted, at a villa somewhere outside Florence. So all you have to know is this for the meaning. This was an actual grandfather and grandson. And not long after this painting, the grandfather died of cancer. And the little boy's affection for his grandfather is what we're talking. He doesn't care what his grandfather's nose looks like. I did have a couple students say, "Oh, he's grossed out by his grandfather's nose." No, none of you said that, or if you thought that, that's okay. No, that isn't what the artist intended. We don't have to guess because Ghirlandaio was so well known that he talked about each of his paintings, to his students, including Da Vinci and Michelangelo. And the Louvre knows, from their research. So the little boy, is expressing a universal emotion, unconditional love, which I hope every family, even dysfunctional ones, have that experience, like my family, we had our issues, but every so often we would express that kind of emotion. It's a universal human emotion, A, and B, of course, it is not religious. It is, whoa, I keep doing that. Sorry, I'm trying to close up on this here in a minute. The point is, he's trying to convey something that all people can relate to, hopefully, at least all families. Have had someone, near death or, ill, and the younger members of the family know it, but they still want to, express their affection. It's a combination of, when you look closely at his eye, you can see your expression in his face and the placement of his hand. And then we have this landscape that ought to look familiar. And we're going to get to this tonight. We'll finish probably with it. Does that look like the landscape behind a certain famous painting by another artist who was one of his students? Okay, the Mona Lisa. That's where Da Vinci got his techniques for landscape painting. Da Vinci really just adopted this artist, his master, his teacher, his mentor, however you want to say that, his techniques for landscape. I mean, winding roads and the, of mountains in the distance. Of course, they have atmospheric perspective. We'll get to the techniques in a minute. And of course, these, oddly shaped trees. I mean, that's all stuff you see in every Da Vinci painting with a background or landscape. You'll see if it isn't obvious in the next couple slides. So that is Da Vinci, was inspired to do landscapes the same way this man was, because he was taught by him. Quick tip to those who might, if you ever get down to LA, the Huntington Gallery, it's called, in San Marino, which is actually a small country in Europe, but it's also a suburb of LA. Go there and you will see incredible paintings, including Blue Boys. Well, have you heard of the guy that's dressed all in blue satin? It's a world famous painting. But Ghirlandaio's only paintings in this country, or at least outside of, I think there's a couple at the Met in New York. So only paintings by Ghirlandaio on the West Coast are both there. There are two of them, and they're both portraits, and they're wonderful, non-religious portraits. So he was one of the first secular painters in the Renaissance, because almost everyone else, including him, when he needed to eat and wanted to get paid, because Catholic Church was rich and could pay good fees, he'd paint religious scenes. But he also chose to paint everyday life. And this is one of the first famous secular paintings. Oh, I keep doing that. Sorry. Let's now look at the full view so we can do the formal analysis. The techniques for space. It's all of the techniques for space, except register line is never going to appear. You can just count on that in a Renaissance painting. It just isn't. It's an ancient technique from ancient Egyptian and Babylonian art. So there's no register line, but all the other 5 techniques are here. Overlapping, obviously. Foreshortening on the windowsill, at least.
Excuse me, are we on the formal analysis already?
Yes, I just said that. Yep.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah,
Can you
that's
repeat
fine.
that?
That's fine. Yes, I will. Okay, no problem. The techniques for space, there are all 5 of the space techniques are found here. The 5 of the 6 that we covered last week. What are those? Let's start with overlapping. It's obvious the figures overlap each other. Okay, next, foreshortening on the windowsill, mostly noticeable, right? A little bit on the grandfather's shoulders. So there is foreshortening. And then we have diminishing size. Well, yes, obviously the things out the window are smaller, right, than the things in the room. We have scientific perspective. In the landscape, there would be a vanishing point, probably right about here if we go up close. And absolutely, it's got atmospheric perspective, that blue, I can never say that, bluish, hazy look on the mountains in the background or in the distance. That is atmospheric perspective, and to a T. I mean, it's superb. This artist was so good at painting, stylized, you can say somewhat, imaginary. It's an imaginary landscape, which is what Da Vinci did. That's why he influenced a whole another century of artists after him for landscape details in a painting like Da Vinci used. Same ideas, same techniques. Okay, so that's space, those 5 techniques. Then we have the largest mass, so that's easy, the grandfather. I would say the close second would probably be the wall behind them if you count that as a single mass, and then the little boy. The rhythm is obvious with the fingers on the boy's hand, the folds of their robes, and of course the hair is on their head, their 2 eyes. We only see his 2 eyes, so there's plenty of rhythm in the landscape, the trees, right? It's pretty much the same shapes. And then we have, is it stable or dynamic? Well, it's both, because the wall behind them is stable and he's pretty upright. And even the little boy, if you follow the line of his shoulders, his hair, and the top of his cap, that's a straight line. But his arm is obviously extended. His head is tilted. So it's both. The top of the old man's head is dynamic, but his overall pose. So it's both, bless you, both stable and dynamic and the same with the landscape. We see the trees, well, mostly it's dynamic on the landscape, yeah, but the window is stable, the windowsill or frame. Okay, the modeling, I'm not even gonna have to say that. You just can count on every Renaissance painting is going to have sharp, realistic modeling on the figures, on the objects, on the skin, and the similar texture also on the hair, the clothing, and the skin, including on his cancer-infected nose, on the grandfather's nose. He didn't spare anything here. Ghirlandaio was painting the way this guy really looked not long before he passed away. They didn't have, I guess, good cancer surgeons back then, or the guy could have probably survived longer. But anyway, he passed away not long after this painting was finished. And then we have, let's see, the rhythm I already mentioned. I think that's, balance. Yeah, I think it is roughly balanced, because to me, this area equals roughly the area, on the landscape of the little boy's head. And look at his head at first, or at least if you go down to his shoulder, if you do the math, it's almost the same as the area covered by the grandfather's head, the part above his clothing. It's roughly balanced, but in a diagonal way, right? His chest, the outside view of the window, the two tops of the two bodies. It's roughly balanced, but I do think most people would think of it as weighted or unbalanced toward the bottom, from top to bottom, right? Because that's empty space. The colors, of course, warm on the two human figures, and mostly cool on the landscape and the wall. Okay. All right, we're doing well on time. So things I don't want to rush through Da Vinci, but I also will occasionally don't have to take notes. Like on this one, this is another Ghirlandaio, and it's a scene in which Mary, mother of Jesus, meets, I think it's her aunt, I can never remember, another, famous saint from the Bible who was her relative, I believe. It's either her older cousin, I can never remember. But the city of Florence is in the background, and apparently there's some kind of a battle happening, because there's smoke, like, from a fire, or maybe an assault with cannon. It's, they had cannon by this time. Anyway, it's an interesting painting. It's on the wall. You don't have to know anything about it, of the Louvre, at the same part of the Louvre, on the same wall as the last painting we saw. They have several Ghirlandaios there at the Louvre. Okay, now let's get to the next must-know. This should interest a lot of you. A mystery painting, very, very well known for being full of mystery, and no one knows the real meaning. So all we can do is speculate based on the clues. So let's first talk about what is this. It's called The Tempest. The Tempest. And it's by Giorgione, or I'll spell his last name, Giorgione, Giorgione, The Tempest, 1510. The little C you can ignore. I've said that before, and I'll keep saying it. You don't have to write the C. That's Italian for about. I mean, they don't know the exact year. Well, let's start with the fact that Giorgione is, or Gigiani, as my aunt in Indiana used to pronounce it. But she didn't know who he was. She knew all about him. She just couldn't pronounce his name. Anyway, the point is, he was famous for mysterious paintings. He did a lot of these, or several famous ones anyway, that I've seen. And this is probably the best known, well, one of the best known of his mystery paintings. We don't know exactly what's happening. The title tells us there's a storm, but we don't have to have a title to explain that, because look, the clouds are gathering and there's lightning, and the sky, is darkening. So clearly there's a storm coming. And those are the walls of a city, a fortified city. It could be Florence, it could be Rome. I think it's probably supposed to be Rome, because the walls around Florence, well, they had them, but those look like the ones I've seen. It just say it's one of the ancient Italian cities that was a walled or fortified city. And so we don't know which city. That's a small part of the mystery. And we don't know whether the storm is literal, just nature, the way it was actually happening on one day when he chose to paint a storm in the distance, or the part of the mystery, major parts of the mystery of these things. We don't know if he, the artist, intended the storm to symbolize something else, such as the anger of God at the corruption of human beings, which is what would make a lot of sense, because by this time there was so much open corruption all over Europe, but especially in Italy, with the different cities, fighting with each other and trying to take over each other, and the Pope having his own army. And sometimes there was 3 popes at once. There were 2 popes often, not often, but more than once. So there were competing, factions, you can just say competing, segments of Italian society that fought with each other and used everything from terror, literally physical and political terror, to bribery and corruption, to try and take over their rivals or defeat their rivals. So that could be what he's saying, that God is angry at us for this corrupt society that we have in Italy at that time. It could be, or it could just be a storm. But nobody can explain these two figures. There are a lot of historians, and I certainly would agree with this, that think this is Mary, mother of Jesus, but then showing her looking like she could be pregnant and nude, that would get him in trouble. And this one, we don't have any Neoplatonic explanation from the artist, like you did with the birth of Venus, where the artist Botticelli said to the Catholic Church, "Oh, these figures have a dual meaning." I've never read that that's what this was. So that could have gotten him in trouble. So maybe it's not Mary or anybody from the Bible. It's just a woman somehow out in the middle of the wilderness by herself. Or some people wonder, is this her husband? But it doesn't make much sense. He could be standing there guarding her. That's true. That's one possibility. But he also has a little bit of a leer on his face. At least many historians believe that he's just a passerby, and he happened to wander onto this scene, and of course he caught his attention, and he's standing there looking at her, perhaps without any kind of kind intent, maybe evil intent. Again, it could be symbolic of the evil that often passes between human beings. And maybe she's a defenseless mother, all by herself. Her husband's dead. Maybe he died in a war that happened back there during this battle of whatever, if it's a battle, a siege of the city. We don't know. And then there's one other theory. This is the one that I think makes the least sense, but it's one you could add as the last thing or fact about the meaning. That these could be Joseph and Mary on their way to Egypt when they escaped from Jerusalem. And it wasn't Jerusalem, sorry, it was Egypt. I misspoke. They escaped. There was no Jerusalem. They escaped. There was, of course, but they escaped from Egypt, supposedly, to go, or to Egypt. No, I had it right the first time. I apologize. I had it right the first time. It's getting late. They left, and just say it could be a scene. Keep it simple. Say it could be a scene from the Bible in which Mary, if that is Mary, mother of Jesus, took their baby along with Joseph, her husband. But the trouble is, Joseph was depicted as 25 or so years older than Mary in the Bible, an old man with white hair, and this guy ain't. So I don't buy that theory, but that's one theory. That's depicting the flight from Jerusalem to Egypt. That's right. They tried to escape King Herod, who was going to kill the firstborn, including Jesus, of every family. And so they left right in a hurry. So maybe. We just don't know. It's a mystery. The painting has no clear meaning that we can identify. Okay, that's the meaning aspect of it, that if it's on the exam. This isn't what I'm saying is so important. I might not cut it, but I may or may not from the study list. Okay, let's do a formal analysis, and we'll keep it brief because we have two really important paintings coming up that I'm going to say won't be cut, and they're both Da Vinci's. Okay, and we don't want to rush through them, and we still hope to end a few minutes early. So this is balance. Oh yeah, this is very, very cleverly balanced with the trees, the city in the middle, the water and the sky, the two figures. It's, of course, roughly balanced, left to right and top to bottom. We have the rhythm of the trees and bushes, the human figures with their arms and legs, of course, and the city in the background. It is mostly stable in the background, I would say, except for the clouds. And if you count the trees, because they're further back than the people, they're pretty much straight upright, mostly, and that bridge is. But then we have the male figure is mostly stable, but obviously the female is dynamic, and the ground she's sitting on. So it's a mixture. There's thin outline around these figures. There's no bold outline. The symmetric texture, I've already said, every Renaissance painting you can just assume has sharp, realistic symmetric textures on the clothing, the skin, the earth or dirt, the ground, however you want to say that, and of course the trees and the sky everywhere, and in the walls of the city, and of course there a strong realistic modeling on all those same areas. And the largest mass, well, that's hard to say. If it's the sky is a single mass, then it would be the sky. Oh, maybe it's the ground beneath where she's sitting. That's up to you to decide. Or this tree, which is slightly larger than this one. There's so many different masses you can choose. Which ones you think look the largest? Okay, and It is mostly, yeah, I already mentioned state. Oh yeah, the colors are mostly warm, except for the sky, of course. Obviously, that would be, and parts of the walls. I mean, some of it is warm, but the foreground, the figures in the ground and all the landscape in the foreground and middle ground are warm, pretty much warm colors, because even here it looks like fall. These leaves are veering into almost a kind of a, autumn colors, which would be earth tones, of course. And the human figures, right? Obviously her skin and mostly his clothing, and the ground around them are warm colors. Okay, now, let me see. I can't remember if we covered this or not. I honestly can't remember. I think we
We
did.
did. We
We
covered
did.
this.
So let's move on. Good. And we covered this last week. I'm going to cut one, and I'm sure you'll be glad that you stuck with it, so you don't have to waste time taking notes or thinking about it, let alone studying it. Okay, this one is the Church of Sant'Andrea. It's the third one down on week 3 this week. Cross it off. We're not going to look at it. We have enough churches, and we will get back to some others. We're certainly not going to not ever look at another church. But you can just say, if you're curious about it, this is the Renaissance building. That's an earlier Gothic or medieval church tower. So somehow the main church next to the tower got probably burned in a fire. And this architect was one of the early Renaissance architects. He was really very successful and influential, but we have to cut something. And we've already covered, a couple of other churches. So this one we're cutting, even though if you ever go to Florence, it's in Florence, you might want to look. It's beautiful inside. It's full of frescoes. But now we're going to do it this way. We're going to do the Last Supper first, and then we'll do the Mona Lisa. I should have done, that's how the art historian that did all these slide files for us chose to put them in that order. But since I put the Last Supper at the top of the list for next week, and I told you we want to get a little ways into the next lecture, so we don't have to be so overcrowded with slides next week. Here we go. This is really important. I'm not cutting this one from the study list. Everyone knows this.
Wait, what?
The Last Supper.
Wait,
Right.
but what happened to that last one? The Church of Saint Andrea.
He
I
said
just
we're
said
cutting
it's
it.
cut. Yeah, I said it's cut. Cross it off. So we just keep moving. This is now the next must know, in other words. Okay, you got that? Yeah, we're not going to talk about that church because we want to focus on these last 2 paintings, and they're both really important. The Last Supper by Da Vinci. I think everyone knows how to spell his name, right? And the date, it's on your syllabus, 1498. Well, let's start with where it is. It's a fresco on the wall of a monastery. You can just say Italy, but if you want to know where, it's Milan, Italy. But you can just say in Italy. A fresco on the wall of a monastery in Italy. And it depicts a scene from the Bible. These are the first facts about the meaning, but there's a lot to say about it. A scene from the Bible in which Jesus had supper for the last time with all of his disciples. That you probably all knew from the title, and just having seen this painting at some point in your lives, everyone's seen it. If you've seen any painting from the Renaissance. So there's Jesus, and here are his disciples. There are 12 of them, right? On either side. And then, wait a minute, let's make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, that's it. 12 disciples, according to the Bible, followers of his, right? Disciples, and Jesus in a room at an inn, and they're eating their Last Supper together. Now, they don't know yet that he's about to be arrested, but he just told them this is what's happening in the scene. So it's all part of the meaning. Jesus has just, you could say, announced or told his disciples that one of them has betrayed him. That's an important point because he is sad. He knows he's about to be arrested. He knows what's going to happen to him. He knows he's going to die, and it's going to be painful the way the Romans treated people. So he was betrayed by someone among one of his own followers. And he is saying or announcing that fact for the first time. You see his hands? One hand is literally palm up, and that's showing his resignation, or you could say acceptance of his fate, of his, his having been betrayed. Literally, the artist was trying to convey all in, we'll talk about what Da Vinci's techniques were in a minute, but first the literal meaning of what's happening in the scene. So that on one hand of Jesus is shown on the table, palm upright, is symbolizing the fact that Jesus is accepting his fate. He knows God told him, I guess, right? You have to go through this in order to die and come up to heaven to be with me again. So he's reluctantly, of course, accepting his fate. But the main reaction is the disciples. Look at them. That's Peter. Look at his hands. He is literally saying, this can't be. And then this man here, we don't know who all the other disciples are. There are debates about who they are, but we'll get to the one or two of those in a minute. But just say that they're all talking to each other. And this man here is pretty obvious, and that'll be one of the younger disciples. They are in shock. That's how to write it. His disciples are all shocked by this announcement that one of them would betray their beloved teacher. Actually, they would have called him a rabbi then, because they were all Jewish. You know that, right? So their beloved rabbi.
Wait a minute.
And so at this point, what you
Excuse
have
me.
is a scene depicting the disbelief or shock, you can use either word, of the entire room full of people, with the exception of Jesus, who's just told them the shocking news. One of you has betrayed me. Now, if you don't know this, you need to write it. Which one betrayed him? This man, Judas, right? Judas, if you didn't know how to spell it, was the disciple who betrayed him, who told the Romans to come arrest him, which is what's about to happen. So Judas is shown as the only person. Look carefully. These details are all part of the meaning. Judas is shown as the only one of the 12 disciples who's not surprised, who's not shocked, because he knows Jesus is on to him. He's
Excuse me.
yes. What?
Sorry for interrupting, but
Oh, go ahead.
funny enough, I actually have a carved recreation up on my, up in
Yeah, a lot of people do.
the living room. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course there are velvet versions of this painting and other kind. It's been reproduced more than any painting in the history of the human race, according to what I've read. Yeah, it's the most famous probably painting. That and the Mona Lisa, which we're going to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on about the meaning, because there's still a couple of other aspects of the meaning I haven't gotten to. But to wrap up what is happening with these figures, they're all in surprise or shock and reacting with shock or surprise to Jesus is telling them that one of them has betrayed him, except for the guy that did that, and that's Judas. Now, this is not a major detail, but you might write it as part of the meaning. You don't have to, but I think it's important because we're in this, very important period of our, culture, our society since, the death, right, last summer, and the Black Lives Movement, and all of this stuff, Floyd's murder and all that. So I'm not going to get political here or bring it up to the modern times. I'll just say this: there are people who look at this painting, they see that Judas, you see my arrow where it is the only one painted with dark skin, and they assume that's a racist detail. They're wrong, and I'll prove it to you. Not only was it common practice since ancient Greek time, you don't have to write this, just listen, ancient Greek theater and Roman theater and Renaissance theater or plays, enacted on stage, would show the villain in a darker light for dramatic effect. That's all that's going on here. They were all Semitic. They were all swarthy. They weren't light-skinned people. And maybe, you could argue that maybe the skin tone of some of them is a little lighter than it should be. But, they're all of the same ethnic background, including Judas and Jesus. So why did he paint them this way? There are two reasons. Why did Da Vinci paint Judas as having slightly darker skin tone? I gave you one reason. I'll repeat it. It's a dramatic device that was thousands of years old and commonly accepted for a scene where one of the people in the scene is the villain, just to point them out. The other reason we know that it isn't about a racial, racist attitude. Da Vinci didn't have a racist bone in his body. His notebooks, all the time, he's writing about different parts of the human family, human community. He hated all kinds of prejudice, both sexist prejudice and racist. He felt prejudices were a stupid waste of human potential. He actually, that's not a quote, but it's close. He was not a racist. He didn't try to portray Jews in darker skin tones because he thought, of some racist idea or stereotype. That wasn't it. Okay, now you should take notes again. You have to give me a break of about 10 seconds. My throat's about to give out. Just 10 seconds. All right, back to what the meaning parts you should put in your notes here. Okay, Da Vinci is famous for having invented this technique, and it's part of the meaning here now. It's not one of the 9 elements of composition. We'll get to the formal analysis in just a couple minutes. What technique did he invent? Here it is, and I'll repeat it because it's very important. It's in all his paintings. He is the first painter ever in the history of the human race, so just say first painter ever or in history, to convey the inner thoughts, you can say portray or convey, either word will do, the inner thoughts and emotions of his figures by body language and facial expressions. I already covered that with Jesus, but I hadn't put it that way. One hand raised is the symbol with the palm up. I meant one hand with the palm raised or palm up is symbolic of his acceptance, his resignation of his fate. These people, like Peter, with his hands raised in shock, literally, oh no, it can't be. And this man here saying, what did he say? That can't be true, right? This disciple. Those are details that are carefully shown by Da Vinci to symbolize their inner thoughts of shock and surprise, as well as the body language of Judas, because he's not shocked and he's not reacting the way the others are. He already knows it because he's the one that betrayed Jesus. So his body language is different. And then we have the expressions on their faces, and Jesus' sad expression, of course. The last thing to say about the meaning is, who is this? Oh, there's a couple of debates on this one. And I side with the people that believe that is the only female disciple, Mary Magdalene. But there are others who say it's just one of the younger male disciples with long hair. But Jesus, according to some versions of this scene, it was written about 4 different times in the Bible. So you can just say one of the versions of this scene from the Bible states that Mary, the only female disciple, you just say her name was Mary, but it was Mary Magdalene, right? Not to confuse her with his mother, right? What would be at his right hand or sit next to him on his right side at all their gatherings, all of the disciples, when they got together, she got to sit right next to him. There's even a theory that they were secretly married. I don't buy that. But in any case, she was a part of his original group of disciples. So why wouldn't she be in this painting? And doesn't that look at least as much, if not more, like a young woman as it does a young man? In any case, we don't know. It could be a male disciple. It could be the only female disciple. But if it isn't that one, then where is Mary Magdalene? And let's go back and see. Why wouldn't Da Vinci have painted her into this painting? Because he had no sexist bias. We just talked about that. He was, of course, gay. You know that, right? And yes, he had a very openly gay lifestyle. He's another one of those artists that didn't have to worry about the church or the city government of whatever. He lived in all kinds of places. Wherever he lived, they weren't going to harass him over that. He was too important. So he was able to be. He got in trouble once or twice as a young man, but once he became world famous or famous all over Europe, he didn't worry about that part of his life. He just did how he felt. And, with consenting adults, literally, there's no evidence of anything else. He was never with a woman, but he had powerful, intelligent female friends his whole life who admired him, supported him, and bought art from him. So why wouldn't he include the only I think it is. I think it's the other Mary, or you can say Mary Magdalene if you want to write her name. There's no proof of that. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning. Although you could add this, you don't have to write this, but this painting is faded because Da Vinci didn't carefully plan how to preserve it. Frescoes have to have something covering them. Once the paint's on the wall, they have to have something. It's called a fixative. Some of you are artists and you know what that means. You don't have to write this, but just for you that wonder, why does it look kind of uneven and faded in part? Because it is. It's 530 years old. So, or 500 and something years, it's over 500 years old. So it's been on the wall of a monastery, exposed to the air, the smoke, the pollution, moisture, and it gets cold and damp in northern Italy. So, you know, it is amazing it survived it all. It's been restored multiple times, most recently in the year 2000. And when I was there, it was 2000. They had just restored it. And I took these slides. These are my own slides. I was so impressed to be able to stand in front of this painting with another professor, don't write any of this, who was there at that university in Milan, I guess it was you. And he got me in, just him and me, and the guard, security guard, of course. I got to walk up to it within 10 feet and look at it. And then, you know, take pictures without a flash, of course. So if you go, you will have to wait in a long line, usually about an hour to 2 hours to get in, but it's worth it. All right, formal analysis, totally balanced. When you look at it this way, you notice that it's got 6, right, of disciples on either side of Jesus. He's in the middle window. The 2 walls are, I mean, it's very carefully balanced. The table balances the ceiling. It's superbly balanced. It's just not literally mirror image, you know, not identical left to right, talked about them, but all the objects balance each other out, you know, either way, top to bottom and left to right. There's no question of that. Not all Da Vinci paintings did, but most of his were balanced. Then we have the largest mass. Well, it depends on how you want to break it down. The table, maybe, but some people consider the whole background of the walls and maybe even the ceiling as one mass. So if you count that as a single mass, you'd have to say that the building around them, the room around them, walls and ceiling are the largest mass. If you see it that way, that's fine. And then we have the table, then would be the second largest. And then it depends. If you count this as one mass, these people all grouped together, or Jesus is the only figure all by himself, then he'd be the third largest. Okay, then we have the simulated texture. Let's get up close, and you can see it's faded here, even when they restored it. But the original painting, we can tell what the colors were. They were still visible after they peeled off all the other later layers of paint. The restoration took 15 years and $15 million to complete, to get back to the original paint. They had these colors still, little tiny specks of each of the colors were still embedded into the wall, of course, in the plaster. So the restoration artists were able to recreate them. So we know these are the right colors. And we can see that there was modeling, strong modeling, even if it's soft and diffused here, that's not how it was originally. I'm sure you know that. There's not an impressionist painting, right? It was super sharp when it was new and realistic. On the simulated textures of the clothing, the hair, the skin, and on the modeling, especially on the bodies of the figures, on their clothes and their faces. Then we have, it's a mixture of warm and cool colors, alternating cool, right? Warm on all the skin tones, cool on the blue robes, warm on the pink and red and orange and yellow. Obviously, it's a mixture. The walls, one side looks kind of warm, doesn't it? And the other looks cool. Maybe that's supposed to be the sunlight coming through the windows hitting this side. I'm not sure why. But my favorite techniques here for this, by the way, it's thin outline around most of the figures. Some people think they see a bold outline around this disciple, whether it's the woman Mary or a young male disciple, we don't know. Maybe, but I really think he used thin outlines because Michelangelo hadn't even really started his career by this time. Well, he was just starting. By the way, they were rivals and they disliked each other. It's just too bad, isn't it? I mean, they could have been good friends and helped each other, but they were rivals. Don't write that. That's just a fact. All right. So what about space? Oh boy, you've got all the major, or 5. Sorry, I'll say them slowly. 5 major techniques for space. There's definitely, let's go back to the full view. Foreshortening on the table and the walls, obviously. Overlapping on the human figures with each other and behind the background behind them. Then we have the diminishing size, the different windows here. Or, well, I guess these are doorways. Well, I'm not sure. There might even be, actually, no, I think they're pieces of you know, like not tarps, yeah, rugs. In any case, they're wall hangings. So we'll say they're probably hanging objects hanging on the wall, carpets or some other kind of thing. So they would be, or tapestries. There we go. I meant tapestries. They're diminishing size, clearly, as is the ceiling. So there's lots of diminishing size. Okay, but my favorite aspect is in the background. That is beautifully done, atmospheric perspective. And there is a vanishing point right behind Jesus, or maybe next to his ear there, Jesus's head. In the distance, there would be a common vanishing point. So you've got, I'll repeat it again, 5 techniques for space: overlapping, foreshortening, diminishing size, scientific perspective, and atmospheric perspective. He almost always used all 5 of those techniques because he was a high Renaissance painter and one of the 2 greatest painters, some would say, that ever lived. That's a matter of opinion. But certainly in Western art, no one would argue him. There were 3 giants of the Renaissance, and we'll get to one of them next week. But the first 2, actually 2 of them next week. The first one, in age, as the oldest of the 3, are the 3 greatest painters of the Renaissance. No one argues with this. Are Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. We're going to cover the last 2 next week. Okay. Stable versus dynamic. The table is stable. The walls are mostly stable, but there's the diagonal angle to the roof. However, it's the human figures that are a mixture. You can see them. Peter's pretty much upright. Jesus is too. And this guy, his arms are stretched out, but his body's upright. So it's a mixture. The walls are stable. The table in front of them is. But then the human figures are varieties of mixture, of stable and dynamic. And of course, there's the rhythm of the food on the table. Let's go up close. These look like pieces of bread, obviously. Then, of course, arms, heads, right? Windows in the walls behind them. So powerful rhythms. And as I said, the lines are mostly thin outlines. Okay, let's go to, hang on. That's a close-up that I took when I was there, but we've already covered this. We're going to go to maybe the most famous, but is the most famous painting ever painted. It's one I'm not going to cut from the study list, so you want to take good notes. It's Mona Lisa, of course, Monalisa, Da Vinci. Again, same artist, and the date is 1504. So what do we know about this painting? There's so many stories about it, and you could say theories or myths that we.
It was stolen.
Pardon? Go ahead.
That became famous after it was stolen.
It was famous. Well,
right after.
I understand what you're saying. It became even more famous after it was stolen. And I was going to mention that at the end. I'll get to what happened to it more recently. How did it end up in France? Obviously, it was painted in Italy. So you have a point. Yeah. And there's some truth to that. But it was already well known before it was stolen. But it wasn't famous during Da Vinci's lifetime, though. So if that's what you're implying, you're right. So let's talk about what we know. Okay, here are the facts that we can verify. And you should be writing these because this is a high possibility of being on the midterm, I can tell you that. First of all, we know who she was. She was the fiance, engaged to be married to a wealthy merchant. You could just say businessman if you prefer, but I think he was a merchant from Florence, named Giocondo, Giocondo. And she is properly named, as in Italy, the female of a married name is with an A. So what is her right name? It's Mona Lisa is an Americanized name. That's not what the people in Europe call it. No one in Europe calls it Mona Lisa, except they've heard Americans say it so many times and for so many years that they do know what you mean if you say, where's the Mona Lisa when you go to see it? But the right name for her actual real last married, now we're talking about after she married, was Gioconda, because her husband was Mr. or Senor Giocondo. Okay, so how do you spell? I'll say it again. Her correct name, the person she married, and then it became her last name. And the title of the painting in Europe is this, one word, Gioconda, Ginconda. You should know that if you're going to look it up online or write a paper about it or do research or anything, or even want to go see it, because we know that fact. We know how this painting was commissioned. Remember, that word's a good word. You all know what that is, right? The man who commissioned it was Mr. or Senor again, or I guess in Italian it's not. Yeah, I think it is the same word. Anyway, the point is the man who commissioned it was her fiance, the man she was going to marry, Giocondo. So it was commissioned as a wedding present for a woman who was going to marry a wealthy merchant in Florence. And he, Mr. Giocondo, you could just say Mr., would have chosen the greatest painter at that time living in Florence. And of course, that was Da Vinci. So those are the facts. But one more fact, we know he didn't like the painting when he saw it. He refused to pay for it. So Da Vinci had to keep it with him the rest of his life. He took this painting with him wherever he went, all over Italy and later all over France. And that's how it ended up in Paris. It's at the Louvre. You all know that, right? It's the most popular painting of any museum and the most famous ever painted. And it's at the Louvre. And they own it because he gave it in his will to the King of France. And eventually the building that the kings lived in became a museum, as you know. Today, the building is called the Louvre. You don't have to worry how to spell it, just write it out. Louvre is where it's now residing, if you want, or displayed. And yes, it was stolen, to go ahead and add to your point about that. Don't have to know when it was, like 1912, I think. Oh, yeah, I'm sure that's right. I just looked it up. You could just say in the early 1900s, it was stolen and it disappeared for several months and was recovered. The thieves were arrested and went to prison. And it was slightly damaged during the time it was in possession of the thieves. So that made it even more famous. Yeah, definitely. But it was already well known by the 1900s, but not during Da Vinci's lifetime, because it was rejected by the man who commissioned it. Now, those are the facts that we know. What we don't know is the theories, just say, that exist about it are mostly related to why is she smiling? Let me give you a few of the most popular theories, and they are just that. Well, her smile is considered, some people just say, some historians or some observers think she's showing a little hidden sadness, right? There's a touch of sadness to her face, or even specifically her smile. I see it when I've done in front of this painting about 4 times. Yeah, just every time I go to Paris, if there's not a super long line, I do want to go to this part of that museum. So I can tell you it does have that feeling when you look at the real painting. So just say many people, just say people, or to be exact, historians, art historians, believe that there's a tinge of, or a note, a hint, you could even just say hint of sadness in her face, in her expression. If that's true, we don't know that, but if it's true, then why? There are the theories, are the theories, and you want to write any one of them if it's on the exam would be a good fact about the meaning. One theory is that she didn't want to marry this man. She was in love with someone else. And he and her were an arranged marriage. Well, that was very common in Italy at that time. And of course, the woman didn't have a choice in most cases, sometimes, but usually they didn't have a choice. So it could be she was not going to be happily married and she wasn't looking forward to her married life. That's one theory. Another ridiculous one is that she was having an affair with Da Vinci. Well, guess what? That's pretty much been disproven. I just said he was gay his whole adult life, and he didn't hide the fact once he became famous. He did when he was younger, because when he was just a student of art, he could have been arrested. But there's no question that he had lived with gay lovers most of his adult life. So I don't think that theory holds water at all. But there are people that still think, well, maybe he was bisexual. It's possible. Of course, it could be, but there's no evidence for that. So most people reject the idea that she was, flirting with Da Vinci, or that they were having a secret affair, which is what some people think is the reason that the husband rejected the painting, because he found out. Yeah, circumstantial evidence. It's very thin. Another theory is that it's a portrait of Da Vinci in drag. Yeah, no. Why? Because we know who this woman was. We know the commission happened. There's letters back and forth between Giocondo and Da Vinci, at least a couple, that show that he commissioned. I mean, no, it's not. That's just a silly theory. I don't know where that came from, but it was actually a whole book was published with that idea about 10 years ago. And there is no question there is a Da Vinci self-portrait underneath this, but he was never wealthy. Well, he wasn't poor, but he never had that much money. Unlike Michelangelo, who got to be quite wealthy during his adult life. He was a much better businessman than Da Vinci. Da Vinci didn't care about money. And so he would reuse the same canvas, including portraits from someone else. In his own self-portraits, he painted a few self-portraits, not very many. And we don't have many, if I don't even know where, if any, or survive. So underneath this painting, it's been x-rayed. There is a probable self-portrait of Da Vinci. That has nothing to do with who this woman is. And then the last theory is that she had had either a miscarriage or some tragedy, a death in her family. And she was just, if she is hiding a broken heart, is so many famous songs. Every singer, Sinatra, Nat King Cole, I mean, how many of the 60s practically all sang a version of the song Mona Lisa, in which the lines that says, "Are you smiling to hide a broken heart?" It's just a theory, and there's no evidence for it anyway. We don't know exactly if she's hiding a broken heart. If so, then why? We don't know. Okay, sorry, question or comment? Go ahead.
Just one more time. Gioconda, right? Ginconda.
Yeah, I'll spell it again. G-I-A, right? G-I-A, and then like the word condo, but with an A, C-O-N-D-A. Yeah, when you go to Paris, you will see it listed that way. And then below that in smaller type, the Louvre knows it's the most popular painting they own, and everyone wants to see it first, or if they can, if they want to see it for sure the first time you go to the Louvre, what are you not going to go look at this? Of course. So they have giant portraits of this, prints of it on the wall with arrows pointing you in the direction to which room it's in, all around the museum. And they label it Gioconda. And then below that, at least the last time I was there, they could have changed it. I was there in 2004, the last time in Paris I was there. It says Mona Lisa, because they know Americans and some other, like Canadians, maybe even some people in England, call it Mona Lisa, even though that's not the right name. I don't know how it got, her first name was Lisa, that we know. So that's how the Lisa part, but I'm not sure why people outside of Europe don't call it by the right name. Okay, you got that, the spelling of that? Yeah. Okay, now look at the landscape. Okay, we have two more facts, so we're gonna go to about 9:25. So we're still in about 5, maybe 6 minutes early. These are two other facts about the meaning, and then we'll do the formal analysis. Da Vinci, invented two techniques for painting. They're both present in this painting, and they are definitions you do need to write. They're not long ones. So flip over to your second page of list of terms to know, and here we go. These two terms could easily, well, I'm almost certain that at least one or both will appear on the midterm. Okay, sfumato, S-F-U-M-A-T-O. I should have to spell these the words. They're on your handout. Sfumato is a technique for painting,
Can you spell that again?
which the artists use a soft. Sorry, what was that? Did you?
Sorry, can you spell that again?
It's on the syllabus.
It's on your handout.
On
Just
your
look at it. It's
thing.
on your handout. Just write it where you're supposed to write it. You got your handout in front of you, everybody, right? Sfumato. Yeah, we're running short on time here. Sfumato. If you want to, I will spell it again after we finish, when I stick around for questions. I always do, as long as you have questions. But let's just finish this and the formal analysis, and then those who are done can take off, and the rest, if you still have questions, I'll stick around. Okay, we'll do it that way. All right, because we're running short. All right, sfumato is a technique for painting in which the artist uses a light wash, that's the only way to say it, over part of the painting to create a smoky, hazy effect. Now that I will repeat. Sfumato is a technique for painting in which the artist uses a light wash over part of the painting to create a smoky, hazy effect. The entire landscape, or you could just say background, because it's all a landscape, has sfumato. You can see that smoky, hazy look, right? Which is a new technique. You can just say many historians believe Da Vinci invented it. There's no proof of that. Nobody had copyrights back then, right? So most historians think he invented it, and this is one of the first paintings. Sfumato.
Smoky what?
Hazy look. Yeah, to create a smoky, hazy, H-A-Z-Y look, okay? The other is a little bit harder to spell, so I will spell this for you once, this word, the last definition for tonight. Chiaroscuro, and that is a long Italian word. So here we go, I'll spell it slowly once. C-H-I-A-R-O S-C-U-R-O. Pronounced chiaroscuro. You don't have to know how to pronounce it. Or even have the exact spelling, but you need to know what it means, because it's almost certainly going to come up on the midterm. What is that? It's a technique for painting, and this time we don't have to guess. Invented by Da Vinci. Everyone agrees that he invented. So I'll say it again. Here's the definition. I'll repeat it once. First time, here we go. It's a technique for painting invented by Da Vinci, in which he used contrasting areas of light and shadow. Whoops, I meant to around like her face. See, in which he used contrasting areas of light and shadow to create the illusion of 3 dimensions. I'll repeat the whole thing again. Okay, chiaroscuro is a technique for painting invented by Da Vinci, comma. You see where my arrow is? That's an example. In which he used contrasting areas of light and dark to create the illusion of 3 dimensions. He used it in several places, around her cheeks, certainly under her chin, even around her eyes. But let's see how it looks when we get up close. And here we go. These are the details I was able to. You see that around her face? That's chiaroscuro. And then you see it here around her chin. Look how dark that is. No one had done that before him. He invented that technique. Even around her hands. You notice that? All of this area is dark, very dark. But he wants you to notice her hands, right? And her face, and overall her, skin, all the parts of her body that shows, her skin is exposed. He wants you to notice them and make it look like she's, a real 3-dimensional person in the painting. So he used that technique of chiaroscuro, but on the background, it's not as important to him, but he does want to create the illusion of space or distance or depth. So he uses sfumato on the whole background. You notice how similar this looks to the landscape in The Old Man and Grandson, right? You should notice that. Well, there's no question there's a direct influence. Okay, let's wrap up. That's plenty on the meaning of this, and we'll do the formal analysis, and then I'll stick around as long as people have questions. But the final part of this, let's do all 9 elements here. She is stable. She is upright. I mean, of course, the top of her head is curved, but she is almost entirely stable. Whereas the landscape behind her, or just the background, it's almost all diagonal and curved lines or jagged rocks and hills. So that the landscape's mostly dynamic. She is mostly stable. And she is obviously the largest mass. Then the balcony, she's sitting on a balcony, right? That should be obvious. I didn't catch that until I actually saw the painting in real life. So that's the second largest mass. And then it's hard to say what's the next largest mass. I don't know. Part of the landscape, you decide. But the 2 largest masses are her and the balcony. The simulated texture here is realistic and sharp, but the modeling has a slightly soft look because of the chiaroscuro. When you get up close, you notice that? So it's the first time you see a Renaissance painter, because he invented that technique, using a slightly soft but yet still realistic modeling technique. And that's where the skin, the bottom of her chin and her face and her hands show up, because he's using this chiaroscuro. And on the background, the modeling is soft and diffused because of that sfumato technique. So here it's not super sharp, but it's realistic nonetheless. And of course, he did it to make the figure of her body stand out as 3-dimensional. And then we have the rhythm, of course, of her hands, her fingers, her hair, her eyes, the landscape, lots of repeated shapes. It is, let's see, balanced roughly. Although if you look carefully, her head is slightly slightly placed further to the, there's a little bit more space to the right of her head, but that's so hardly noticeable that you just say it looks or feels roughly balanced left to right, but of course unbalanced toward the bottom because of the sky. Only thin outline. He didn't use bold outline very often. Some people think they see it on her fingers, maybe, but that'd be it. Everything else is thin outline, her and the landscape. And then the colors, of course, warm on her skin tone, warm on her clothing, warm on the closest parts of the landscape, and then cool on the entire background. And last, what techniques for space? Well, he always used all 5 of these. I'll say them again. There's obviously overlapping of her in the background and her clothes over her. Diminishing size, of the mountains and the landscape behind her, foreshortening on her shoulders and the balcony. Scientific perspective, if you were to draw, there'd be lines that would meet behind her forehead, actually, probably on the horizon, which is there. So there's scientific perspective, and finally, yes, there's atmospheric perspective. Now, if you're curious, you don't have to write this. That's the whole formal analysis. But just to finish up that thought, imagine one or two of you have thought, or maybe more. Well, and what's the difference between sfumato and atmospheric perspective? There is an overlap. Don't write this. Just follow me here. In a way, but if it was only atmospheric perspective, it would only be on the hills in the very distance, like there. And maybe there's a little bit of it on the horizon itself, or these hills, but it's the entire background. So sfumato is not just exactly the same, or a slightly different word for the same technique. Here it's sfumato, but the background does have it in the distance, a blue. You see the bluer look here as you get up closer. You see that there and there. So it has, yes, atmospheric perspective and all the other techniques for space that we've been talking about tonight. All right, thank you all. I'll stick around if you have questions. Okay, anybody have questions that I didn't answer, or about anything related to anything we've covered tonight?
Could you, I think I missed the end of the definition for chiaroscuro. I just didn't write it all down like verbatim. I heard you say it.
Okay,
I
sure,
just wanted to write it down.
no problem. It's a technique for painting invented by Da Vinci, in which he uses contrasting areas of light and dark to create the illusion of 3 dimensions, period. Yeah, so he felt it made his objects, especially the human figures, look more realistic, more lifelike, more like they were real 3-dimensional objects. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Of course, if you have questions about the paper, I will take them either as in emails, and you can use either the Outlook for email, just email, any kind of email communication. You can use either, but it is faster if you go to my Mark W at AOL to get an answer or any kind of response from me about any questions, or next week in class, or at the end of class again, like we're doing now. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, well, I think we ended a reasonably good time here, and thank you all for your attention and your questions and comments. All right, have a good week. Okay, good night, you guys.
Good night.
Take care. Thanks. All right.